The Elemental Wizard of Hogwarts Chapter 241-260. Chapter 241-2 Dumbledore. Charles recently felt that he had lived an exceptionally good week, eating well and sleeping well. Not only that, but even because of the cool things about Buckbeak, Shire already feels as if he is getting used to such a salted fish life. But there was one thing that Seal always felt wrong, and that was that for some reason, Seal always felt that he had forgotten something. It was not until Dumbledore found Seal again that Seal remembered what he had forgotten. The teacher and the apprentice stood in the principal's room and looked at a roaring letter that had been delayed for a long time, speechless. To be honest, Seal never thought in his life that he would receive a roaring letter one day. It didn't matter if he received a roaring letter, it was still mailed to Dumbledore. "I said, teacher, can't you just get rid of that thing?" Charles asked, pointing to the roaring letter that was already smoking on the table. Dumbledore also looked at Seal speechlessly. "Don't think about it. This is the first time my brother has sent me a letter, and you must know that my brother's level is no less than mine. The most important thing is that in attacking I'm not as good as Aberforth when it comes to magic or some gadgets." Hearing Dumbledore's words, Seal looked at Dumbledore suspiciously. For some reason, Seal always felt that Dumbledore was simply deceiving himself. Albus Dumbledore, the world's #1 white wizard and headmaster of Hogwarts, have trouble handling a little roaring letter. Charles said that I don't read much, so don't lie to me. But seeing that the roaring letter with his name written on the table had begun to beat continuously, and the smoke was getting bigger and bigger, Seal still accepted his fate and stepped forward to open the roaring letter. Seal's fingers just touched the roaring letter, and the roaring letter floated instantly. After undergoing a series of folds and deformations, it turned into a pair of big red mouths, and Aberforth's angry voice came out from the roaring letter. "Boy Shire, I think you've forgotten something. If you want to default, I swear I'll attack your beloved teacher, my long-dead bastard brother's office. Do everything possible to ask for your home address and then ask your mother if she taught you what it means to be honest. No one can deceive me without paying the price. No one, even if my bastard brother is standing behind you, I swear. If you forget our transaction content, I don't mind going to school in person. You should teach your child well that you shouldn't play tricks. My bastard brother can't teach you what honesty is if he's going to die. I think I should be able to teach you. Also, that old bastard standing next to Shire, I swear, if you show up in front of my eyes again, don't blame me for asking you out in some not-so-good way." The roaring letter was so fast that Seal didn't even have time to give himself the last roaring letter before he roared everything in front of him, and then turned into an ordinary red envelope with a snap. Fell to the ground. It was the first time that Seal felt the power of the roaring letter head-on. I really don't know how poor little Ron resisted Mrs. Weasley's incessant nagging in the 2nd grade. Seal swears that when facing the roaring letter just now, he vaguely seemed to have seen Aberforth's sturdy body roaring at him standing in front of him. Even when the roaring letter was roaring, Seal could even feel Aberforth's saliva sprayed on his face, even though the roaring letter was just a paper magic item. Dumbledore saw that Seal looked like the rest of his life after the end of the roaring letter, and couldn't help laughing secretly. After a while, Dumbledore comforted Seal, who had not yet recovered. "It's all right, Seal, you must know that you are the one who is going to inherit my mantle. Sooner or later, you will get used to this stuff." After Seal heard Dumbledore's comfort, he slowly recovered, subconsciously wiped the saliva that did not exist on his face with his hand, and squinted at his teacher who was snickering. Said helplessly, "Teacher, you will definitely remove this thing, right?" Hearing Seal's question, Dumbledore shook his head very righteously. "No, I won't." "Really not? Really not?" After experiencing some extreme pulling, Seal swore that if it wasn't for the smile in Dumbledore's eyes that he couldn't hide the whole time, Seal might have really believed his nonsense. One thing to say, this thing is almost comparable to the demon roar of the boss when he was a laborer in his previous life. Fortunately, Seal didn't intend to continue to tangle so much on this matter. He picked up the roaring letter on the ground and threw it into the trash can, and looked at his teacher again. "Come on, teacher, I think I should also go and pay your Dumbledore family." Hearing Ciel's words, Dumbledore swallowed the words he wanted to refuse. He seemed to have thought of something. He stared at Ciel for a long time without saying a word. Ciel didn't look at his teacher the whole time. After speaking, he turned around and pushed open the door of the principal's room. Dumbledore saw Ciel pushing open the door of the headmaster's room, and 1,000 words finally turned into a sigh, followed by a trace of anticipation, a trace of fear, and a trace of apprehension. The two walked to the gate of the school one after the other, and Ciel sighed helplessly, turned back and took the initiative to hold Dumbledore's hand. This action of Ciel seemed to inexplicably give Dumbledore a huge encouragement, and the remorse and anxiety in the eyes of the old man disappeared most of the moment when Ciel took his hand. Looking at Ciel's actions in surprise, Dumbledore smiled for the first time on the way and let Ciel lead him to the Pig's Head bar. Of course, such a warm scene can only go to the door of the Pig's Head bar. The reason is very simple. The two just came to the door, and a magic spell flew out from it. If it wasn't for Dumbledore's quick reaction, I don't know what would have happened. After Ciel enjoyed the rare magical duel for a while, Ciel shouted into it, "I'm here to pay you, brothers. If you don't want it, I swear I'll do it right now. You can turn around and leave." Hearing Ciel's shout, the spell inside stopped for a moment. After a long time, Dumbledore sighed and said to Ciel, "Come in with me." Chapter 242-2 Dumbledore 2. As soon as Dumbledore led Ciel into the pub, he couldn't help frowning. The reason was very simple. Although the original Pig's Head pub looked dilapidated and even dirty, but Aberforth was still operating normally, but when the two entered the tavern, it was obvious that Aberforth had not run his own tavern for a long time. The chair was upside down on the table, and the spider spun a large web on the legs of the chair and the table, and even Aberforth himself was leaning against the bar with a bottle of fire whiskey in his arms. Seeing the two come in, Aberforth burped and looked at the two with a bad expression. "You'd better give me a perfect explanation, Shire stinky boy, otherwise, I think it's either you or you. Don't even think about walking out the door of this tavern intact." Ciel pinched his nose in disgust and looked at Aberforth, who was drunk in the bar, then looked at Dumbledore beside him, and asked helplessly, "Seriously, teacher, there is a way to make the environment here better. A little, and sober up the debt collector drunk." After Dumbledore listened to Ciel's words, he frowned slightly, then smiled helplessly, and replied, "Yes, but I believe that the person at the bar will never like my hands." Hearing Dumbledore's explanation, Aberforth slowly raised his eyelids and glanced at Dumbledore. "You still have some self-knowledge." After speaking, without waiting for the two of them to react, he pulled out his wand and waved it. Charles swears that magic is so magical no matter when you look at it. Under the command of Aberforth, the dust in the room gathered in a ball and flew out from the open window, and the chairs on the table looked like soldiers. He jumped off the table and placed himself in the same position, obediently entered under the table and waited for his next guest. In just a short while, the originally depressing and dirty environment became clean and tidy, and Aberforth burped before continuing. "Okay, I've fulfilled your second request, boys. Ciel, hurry up and pay what you should pay." Ciel glanced at Dumbledore helplessly. Dumbledore could only quietly take out a bottle of potion from his arms and secretly stuff it to Ciel, signaling Ciel to drink it for Aberforth to sober up. Dumbledore believed that Aberforth would not drink it if he was killed. Ciel reluctantly did as he did, and after drinking the potion, Aberforth, who had sobered up a lot, stopped his drunken madness, and his reason returned to the high ground. After glancing at Dumbledore with disgust, the three found a fairly large table in the tavern and sat down. Ciel looked at the two old men in front of him and sighed helplessly. "My reward for you is simple, Resurrection Stone. Allowing you to meet the deceased relatives you met." As soon as Ciel's voice fell, both Dumbledore's eyes burst into an amazing light. Feeling the elements and magic in the air that were gradually becoming irritable, Ciel had no doubt that if he wanted to say no now, the two old men in front of him would be able to live up to him. Even calling his other teacher, Grindelwald, might not be able to stop the two old people in front of him. A drop of cold sweat dripped from Ciel's forehead, and he forcibly looked at the two old people in front of him under the pressure. But, listen to me, the two of you, I have one condition. That is, you two must use the resurrection stone together. As soon as Ciel finished speaking, Aberforth shouted, with him. Impossible. Ciel looked at Aberforth with a serious face. No, I don't think I'm joking, even if you don't want it. This is my condition of use, not to mention that the two of you have been like this for almost a century. Do you want to be like this for the rest of your life? Hearing Ciel's words, the two Dumbledore rarely lowered their heads like children who had done something wrong. Ciel looked at the two of them, and finally sighed and didn't speak any further. After everyone calmed down the awkward atmosphere for a while, Ciel then looked at the two old men opposite him and said, "First of all, I want to tell you that the so-called resurrection stone does not really bring people back to life, it just can temporarily summons back the soul of the deceased. I think you should know this." As Ciel's voice fell, the two old men nodded solemnly, and Ciel was relieved. He took out the resurrection stone that he had hidden for a long time from the small bag around his neck and threw it on the table. The two old men's breathing became heavier almost as soon as Ciel threw the resurrection stone. Neither of the two said a word, they were all staring at the diamond-shaped red gem on the table. Ciel didn't say anything, he just stood up and walked slowly to the gate. He paused as if he had remembered something, and then continued. "You two only have an hour, teacher, Mr. Dumbledore. I hope you remember what you promised me just now." After he finished speaking, Ciel pushed the door and walked out without hesitation, staring blankly at the quiet gate for a long time without any sound coming out. After a long time, Ciel took a sigh of relief again, took out his magic wand and made a suspended sign and hung it at the gate of the Pig's Head Bar, and then slowly left. Ciel is going to the post office in Hogsmeade to find an owl to write a letter to Grindelwald. Ciel doesn't know if he will repair the relationship between the two brothers by doing so, and he will be ready for everything. Grindelwald, who can comfort Dumbledore in this world? Well, comfort in various senses. After all, letting Aberforth's mentality collapse and venting is a kind of comfort in the strict sense. Ciel rubbed his chin and thought with a bit of wickedness. As for what happened in the tavern, Ciel swears that he is not interested in it, nor does he want to be interested, whether in his past life or in this life. Ciel is very lucky to have a happy family. The history of some of the suffering of the Dumbledore family, along with the changes in the relationship between Ciel and Dumbledore, has always affected Ciel's heart. After all, Ciel has sworn from the beginning that since he has come here, as a person who hates tragedy, Ciel must do his best to save them. According to the content of the previous Life movie, to find a word to describe the old man who looks like the sun shining on Harry's life, the only word Ciel can think of is loneliness. Fortunately, there is still Ciel in this world, and it just so happens that Ciel wants that old man not to be so lonely. Chapter 243-Reunion of the Old. Ciel wrote a letter at the Owl post office. After choosing an owl that looked stronger and flew faster, he whispered a few words in the ear of the owl, and then started walking towards the candy store with his hands behind his back. For a whole hour, Ciel still wanted to have some fun, but when Ciel walked into the candy store and saw the dazzling array of candies, Ciel suddenly lost his appetite, and at this time Ciel began to miss him. Muggle supermarket. If nothing else, the fact that the wizards didn't sell potato chips, Ciel's favorite fried snack, made Ciel feel that his acceptance of magic was once again lower. With an attitude that the village has not yet connected to the internet, Ciel complained that the snacks in the magic world turned out to be candy, while licking the lollipop he bought at the candy store. And he also bought a big bag of other small candies and chocolates very thoughtfully. After all, in this UK where it is difficult to find melon seeds even in the Muggle world, the tools to pass the time are very limited. As Charles walked to the Hog's Head Bar, he was still thinking about what he said to the owl just now. "Because it's really bad, I've been bothering our Uncle Fox, and Grindelwald seems to know what Ciel is thinking, since the last time Ciel met at Dumbledore's ancestral home." Grindelwald told Shire a spell with a strange pronunciation. As long as he chanted the spell on the owl could automatically locate Grindelwald's location, without saying the address or name. As Seal walked, he thought very wickedly that if this thing was in development, it might not be able to become an owl creature GPS, and then he would do a Harry Potter version of the Insight Plan or something. All the way to the door of the Pig's Head bar, Seal stopped the huge and evil Hydra plan in his mind, and stared blankly at the extremely quiet Pig's Head bar. Looking at the mechanical watch on his wrist, only half an hour has passed. After looking at the building that looked quiet and peaceful in the sun, Charles sighed silently, just like a street boy. He crouched down at the door of the bar. For a while, I looked at the passers-by, and for a while at the ants under my feet. I was bored and passed my time waiting for the two Dumbledores to come out. I don't know how long it took. The door of the bar was gently pushed open from the inside, and Shahar immediately threw off his gay temperament and stood up properly. Dumbledore walked out of the room with a smile and saw Seal standing at the door of the bar. Dumbledore waved at Seal very kindly and motioned for Seal to come over. Seal hurriedly ran to Dumbledore's eyes and looked carefully at the old man in front of him. Dumbledore's face showed no reaction at all. As for the red eyes and nose of Seal's phenomenon, he was completely indifferent. Not reflected in Dumbledore's face. Dumbledore didn't notice that Seal looked straight at him, took out his hand in his arms, took out the prismatic red gem and returned it to Seal. "Thanks, Charles, this is probably the happiest gift I've received in years." Dumbledore's tone was very sincere. This was Seal's first reaction. Then Seal felt that his teacher, the Dumbledore in front of him, seemed to be different, but Seal didn't notice it at all. Shaking his head, Seal slapped Dumbledore with a ha-ha. "Don't make trouble, teacher. I swear, compared to this thing, the gift I give you every Christmas is 1,000 times better than this thing." After hearing Seal's words, Dumbledore was obviously stunned for a moment, and then burst out laughing. "That's right, Seal, your Christmas present is indeed 1,000 times better than these things." Seeing that Dumbledore seemed to be in a very relaxed state, Seal stopped talking, and put the resurrection stone in the small pocket on his chest again, and then went up to hold Dumbledore's hand, the master and the apprentice. Bathed in the sun, he began to walk towards the towering castle in front of him. "Want some candy? I went to the candy store and bought quite a few." "Of course, thanks, little Charles. Sweets are a wonderful thing, aren't they?" The two just followed the path between the mountains, like a bunch of real grandchildren walking slowly towards the castle. Until the bridge that was about to reach the gate of the castle, at the last turn, a figure that even Charles, let alone Dumbledore, did not expect appeared at the corner. "Gellert, you." Dumbledore looked extremely surprised, and stared blankly at Grindelwald, who seemed to have used human body transfiguration in front of him. Grindelwald ignored Dumbledore's surprise, pointed at Seal and said, "This kid wrote to me and said everything. He was a little worried about whether the resurrection stone would lead people to death as in the legend, so here I am." Quote. Following Grindelwald's words, Dumbledore looked at Seal, who was still holding his hand beside him, in surprise. His eyes were surprisingly gentle, but he didn't say anything more. On the other hand, it was a little embarrassing for Seal. He really didn't expect that Grindelwald would be so straightforward. Seal spoke incoherently for a while, then sighed helplessly, and took out the resurrection stone again. "2 teachers, half an hour. Don't get caught in it, okay?" Hearing Seal's almost pleading tone, Dumbledore didn't wait to speak, but Grindelwald laughed first. "Stinky boy, what are you thinking? Standing in front of you is the top of the entire magic world today. The two of you." Hearing Grindelwald's words, the corners of Charles's mouth twitched. "Are you really good at Versailles?" "Neither of the two." Some speechless, he threw the resurrection stone into Grindelwald's hand again, and then walked forward without looking back. "Waiting for your teacher at the gate. Half an hour, don't be late. If it's late, it is estimated that it's going to be late for dinner. Oh, there's one more thing, mistress, you are optimistic about the teacher. Teacher, you should also pay more attention to mistress. I support the domestic violence of the two of you." After speaking, Seal didn't wait for the two of them to react, and ran away. The speed seemed to show the strength of feeding. The two old men standing at the top of the pyramid in the entire high magic world were stunned after hearing Seal's small revenge, especially Dumbledore. The embarrassment in Grindelwald's eyes seemed to become real. Fortunately, Grindelwald responded quickly, and a roar appeared in the forest. Charles Lancaster. A roar alarmed many birds in the forest, but it didn't make Seal feel scared at all. As for the reason, it's very simple. After so many years, the 5-kilometer seal has not been practiced in vain. At this time, he was already standing in the school. Dumbledore was waiting at the gate. Of course, you have to ignore the breathless breath in Seal's mouth. Chapter 244-Ravenclaw's Little Revenge. Seal felt that he had been very unhappy recently. He had already dealt with the reward he promised to give, and the resurrection stone continued to lie in the small bag on his chest. But unfortunately, Seal always felt that I had forgotten something very important, but I couldn't remember it. Seal even asked Neville to borrow a memory ball. As a result, Seal became even more angry. Looking at the red smoke in the memory ball, Seal was even more sure of what he had forgotten, but Seal did not know what he had forgotten. To sum up, since the separation from Grindelwald, Seal has fallen into a kind of situation. I have forgotten one very important thing, but I don't know what I have forgotten. This kind of feeling makes Seal feel crazy, and even now, Seal already feels that he is about to become his own demon. But there is one thing to say, Seal still feels that this period of time is definitely the happiest day in the school for the past 7 years. Harry is still quietly learning the Patronus charm in Lupin. It is said that it is about to gather the Patronus. To the point. Hermione also quietly continued to use the time shifter for class, because unlike the original books, all of them were electives, so Hermione spent almost all of her rare break in the library with Seal. As for Ron and Seal, it was rare for the two to get together to eat, drink, and have fun. The only difference might be that Seal was fine. In order to exercise his elemental control, there would often be some small whirlwinds around him. A small flame fell on a stone candlestick that was held in the air by a water column. This magical sight had been practicing constantly when he and Dumbledore returned from outside the school. As for his molesting Grindelwald, as long as Grindelwald didn't appear in front of him and stared at his throat with his wand and made Seal feel that he was not far from death, then Seal didn't care at all. Threatening to start a period of targeted teaching for yourself during the summer vacation is considered a fart. Anyway, as long as you can't catch me and don't appear in front of me, I will consider it a fart. Of course, none of these made Seal the happiest, and the change that made Seal the happiest was Dumbledore, although on the surface he was still the weird old man who looked odd and liked to wear lavender wizard robes. But Seal really felt Dumbledore's changes. How should I put it? He seemed to have become much younger and more real. This kind of feeling is very mysterious. Obviously, the attitude towards Seal is still the same as he used to laugh, but since he came back that time, Seal has also really felt that Dumbledore has become a lot more real, not what he used to be. Although it will also make people feel like a spring breeze, but there is a sense of distance that is difficult to detect. Even the flower work of this water-top oil lamp was Dumbledore's suggestion to Seal, and Seal implemented it very well. I can feel myself changing every day. This kind of comfortable and peaceful state lasted for nearly half a month. Seal just remembered what he had forgotten, and why Seal remembered it. The reason is very simple. Dumbledore almost destroyed Voldemort's Horcrux in front of Seal. As for the reason, it is very simple. Dumbledore didn't know what he talked to Grindelwald in the woods, and it seemed that he gave up. His original plan began to weaken Voldemort with all his strength. Of course, none of this has anything to do with Seal. Looking at the crown on the table that was about to be split in half, Seal seemed to remember it all at once, but when she recovered the power of the elements, Ms. Ravenclaw seemed to maybe to ask myself to go to her when it's all over. After that incident, Seal kept his feet off the ground and almost forgot Ravenclaw's exhortation. Now that he saw the destroyed Horcrux, Seal remembered that he seemed to still be with Ravenclaw. Venclaw also has an agreement. So, without even wanting to ask Dumbledore what he wanted to do next, Charles almost once again took out his milk-feeding energy, turned into a whirlwind and ran out of the headmaster's room, and began to go to the room of requirement sprint. When Seal appeared again panting in Ravenclaw's back room in the room of requirement, Seal's first words were a 90-degree bow of apology. But there was no response. Seal raised his head in doubt, only to find that the secret room was empty at this time, and only Ravenclaw's body lay quietly behind the huge golden book. Just when Seal was wondering what was going on, a cold voice came out from above Seal's head. "Let me see, our busy classmate Seal finally remembered me." After Seal heard the sound, he hurriedly turned around and looked up. At this time, Ravenclaw was floating in the air, as if sitting on a chair. There was a magazine floating in front of her. "Look at it, good guy, it's still the latest issue of Naysayers." All of a sudden, the originally embarrassed Seal felt that the corners of his mouth could not help twitching. At this time, Seal felt like a great man in the Tang dynasty for 1,000 years, but he was holding a playboy in front of you alive. A warm feeling to watch. Ravenclaw ignored Seal, who was galloping in his heart, and just waved his hand gently, and the magazine in front of him disappeared with the sound of a bubble bursting. Seeing that the magazine disappeared, Ravenclaw stood up slowly, like stepping on the stairs, and walked down from the void step by step. When he came to Seal, and saw the strange look that Seal looked at himself, Ravenclaw said, "Don't look at me like that, although I am the soul of the whole castle, but I am surrounded by myself. The greed is forever trapped here. As for the castle, all I can say is that there's very little I can do when no one's actually starting the spell, and that's pretty much the only entertainment I've had in 1,000 years. But it's not bad. For books, any book is my love, not to mention that magazine is very interesting for a scholar." Hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal understood, but he still unconsciously felt a sympathy in his heart, but then Seal seemed to have discovered a bright spot. "I take the liberty to ask, where did you get that magazine from?" Ravenclaw looked at Seal in front of him with some doubts, and then snapped his fingers. Almost in an instant, the things in the neatly tidy cabinets in Seal's bedroom were like it was raining. It landed on Charles's head. The corner of Seal's mouth twitched, and he hurriedly tore off the new underwear on his head that he hadn't worn yet, and suddenly understood how Ravenclaw had read the books he wanted for more than 1,000 years. "Ah, if I remember correctly, it was on the bed of a little girl in our college." Seal heard Ravenclaw's words, and the figure on the ground tidied up his clothes for a moment. "Good guy, I said that a lot of people's things will disappear occasionally, but they will appear again inexplicably after a while. I thought that it was the house elves who did it, and now it seems that the master is here." Chapter 245 History of the Big Four. While enduring his huge desire to complain, Seal silently sorted out the messy clothes on the ground. Just as Seal just finished sorting, he was still thinking about how to put these clothes back without being noticed. "When in your closet." The Ravenclaw on the opposite side snapped his fingers again. It was as if Seal had put his clothes in a swamp, and little things slowly appeared in front of Seal's eyes. Seal looked at the legendary cold and noble Ravenclaw in front of him speechlessly, but he was constantly complaining about how this mischievous royal sister didn't look like the legendary Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw, however, did not pay any attention to Seal's resentful eyes. After a little punishment to calm down the only emotion in his heart, Ravenclaw once again restored the image of the expressionless Gao Lengyuji. "Remember what I said to you after you actually got the inheritance of the four of us?" Charles nodded, "Remember." After seeing Seal nodding honestly, Ravenclaw looked at Seal with satisfaction, a smile on the corner of his mouth unconsciously, and then returned to Seal. "Then now, ask." After hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal thought for a while before asking, "Professor Ravenclaw?" Seal probed carefully, and after seeing that Ravenclaw did not refute his title, Seal then asked boldly, "I want to know too much, such as your inheritance, such as the branch back then. What kind of natural elements are the haters talking about? There are so many questions that I don't know where to start for a while." Seal scratched the back of his head a little awkwardly while speaking. Ravenclaw looked at Seal in front of him, and after a long time, he couldn't help sighing and said, "Okay, don't ask, I'll tell you. I think this story is a long time ago, but the four of us were good friends from apprenticeships. Gryffindor was brave but reckless, Slytherin was elegant but calculating, Hufflepuff always I can embrace all things with kindness, and my greed for knowledge makes me almost the most knowledgeable among the four of us. When we were on adventures together, high spirits, and fame spread almost across the country almost immediately. Not content to be stuck in one place, we decided to start our journey. I have to say that there is a saying in the Far East that it's better to travel thousands of miles than to read thousands of books. During the journey, the four of us gained a lot. Slowly, the four of us gradually touched the limit of the wizard's power and were about to come into contact with the elements. Shire, you need to know one thing. In our era, elemental mages are already very rare objects, although most people who come into contact with that field will choose the same way as your teacher, and restore the cultivation of the predecessors. Model. But the world is always full of geniuses. There are a small number of people who have given up the cultivation of the four elements and instead specialize in one element. The consequences of doing this are obvious, and it will be difficult to go further in this life, but relatively, these people who specialize will have super high attainments in their own element field far exceeding those of the same level. The four of us were also faced with such a choice at the time, whether to go all out to see if we have a chance to hit the legendary demigod realm that mastered the natural elements, or to specialize in one. In our respective fields no one can beat it. Just as we were hesitating to quarrel, we came to the legendary East and met the person who made us unforgettable for the rest of our lives. Shire, you have to know that in the East, the environment is too different from ours, and our side is still suffering from the split between Muggles and wizards led by the Church. In the Far East, an educational model called a private school or a sect has long been opened, focusing on an education without distinction. Although it disguised well among Muggles, it was nothing among those in power at the time. Secret. Even as far as I know, there are still many rulers in the ancient East who are not Muggles themselves, and the idea of founding Hogwarts was also learned in the ancient East. When Ravenclaw said this, Seal once again felt that his three views were being reshaped, and he even began to doubt his life. The writing of a million-word biographical newspaper can come out alive. Ravenclaw, however, did not stop his memories because of Seal's surprise, but continued, when we were traveling in that ancient eastern country called Tang. Or something, we met a person, a Taoist priest, that's how it should be pronounced. Until now, I can clearly remember that person's name. According to the Eastern way of reading, it should be Yuan Tiangong. Well, it should be true, he was very interested in our magic from the West and we were also very interested in the ancient East. Therefore, naturally, we became good friends. The five of us talked about everything together. We even had in-depth exchanges on magic and the like. They seemed to be called Dao Fa or something. I almost can't remember. In the end, when we were about to part, Yuan Tiangong, a prophet, gave us a prophecy as a farewell ceremony. After listening to Ravenclaw's narration, Seal felt that his chin seemed to fall on the ground and never picked it up again. Whether it was the characters or stories in the narrative, Seal couldn't help but feel a hint of fantasy. Seal, who couldn't help but wonder, still asked, "What prophecy?" Ravenclaw looked at Seal's curious look, and smiled slowly before answering, "Fenzi Mansion is full of peaches and plums, and his mansion collapses, and the boundless darkness will cover the earth, the deceased stand up and live. People can't ask for death." Hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal was a little puzzled. This thing was a little too fantastical. Ravenclaw looked at Seal with a question mark on his forehead and couldn't help but smile. "To be honest, you look exactly the same as Gryffindor back then, and the four of us don't even know what that means." Fortunately, another person we knew gave us a recalculation and explained it to us very intimately. That person's name was Li Chunfeng. After hearing the familiar name, Seal's mouth twitched again, but he didn't say anything, just waited silently for Ravenclaw's answer. Seeing that Seal didn't answer, Ravenclaw shook his head and continued, It's actually very simple. If we choose specialization, then we can successfully establish Hogwarts, but if we choose the traditional cultivation method, then John Bull will be a dead place in the future. Chapter 246 The Wisdom of the Big Four. After hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal couldn't help frowning. He was about to speak, but was interrupted by Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw waved his hand before continuing. At that time, we were also very curious about what would make the entire John Bull become a dead place. At that time, the four of us were still young and did not directly ask our doubts. At that time, before we could continue to ask other questions, Li Chunfeng was wrinkled. Brows raised. It sounds amazing, Shire, you have absolutely no idea how the Taoists in the East used to do divination at that time. They just used a few copper coins to combine a turtle shell. At that time, Li Chunfeng looked at the tortoise shell and copper coins on his desk and said involuntarily, "This hexagram, it seems that Yuan Daoyu has not finished solving it." After all, Li Chunfeng pinched his fingers in front of the four of us again, as if he was doing math, but the four of us didn't know what he was doing at the time. After a long time, Li Chunfeng opened his eyes again, looked at the four of us, and said to us, "Fellow Taoist, no matter what, you are a guest from afar. Today, I, Li Chunfeng, also have a fate with everyone. Today, I will finish this hexagram. It's my parting gift to you." Seriously, Shire, Hufflepuff, who was still a girl at the time, blushed when he looked at Li Chunfeng. After Ravenclaw finished speaking, he laughed as if he remembered something interesting. After a long time, he continued, "According to Li Chunfeng's hexagram, we know one thing, that is, if we do not specialize in one element, then there will definitely be a catastrophe that no one can avoid in the future, only the four of us specialize in it. 1. Cultivate their respective elements to the extreme, then there will still be a glimmer of life in the future." At that time, we didn't really believe the words of these two fortune tellers, we just listened to them. At that time, after we had awakened the elements that belonged to us after we left the ancient country of the East, we had to believe their words. You should already know what happened after that. At the end of our lives, the four of us left what we learned all our lives in the elements, and those who passed our test were deemed to have passed the test of the elements. As Ravenclaw's voice fell, Seal felt as if he had finished listening to a long storytelling and secret history, and felt that everything in his mind was a mess. Seal silently sorted out in his mind what he knew and what Ravenclaw said just now. Gradually, Seal discovered something different. Wait, if I remember correctly, Slytherin's exodus was ostensibly for the school to set up a face-to-face enemy, but in fact he left to go further, right? Hearing Seal's words, Ravenclaw showed a rare happy smile and nodded to Seal. You are right, after the four of us have reached the pinnacle of our respective elements, we all wondered if we could improve further, but Slytherin was the last to give up. You should know that Slytherin's academy admissions standards are actually persistent. But also because Slytherin left to look for something further, after his secret return, the four of us were able to leave behind something that I am still proud of. After Ravenclaw finished speaking, he pointed to the golden giant book behind him, and then continued, my knowledge, the method of Slytherin's perseverance in exchange, the material of Gryffindor's courage, the fruit of Hufflepuff's labor. In fact, this is a real inheritance, we named him Hogwarts. Hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal was a little confused for a while, but soon, Seal reacted with a little trembling in his voice. You mean, that giant book of gold is called Hogwarts? Isn't this castle called Hogwarts? Hearing Seal's question, Ravenclaw nodded, and then continued, yes, this book is called Hogwarts, the name I chose, but the other three prefer to call him the Book of Enlightenment. Book. After Seal heard Ravenclaw's affirmation, he couldn't help but feel an absurd feeling in his heart. Hogwarts for thousands of years did not refer to a castle, but this book placed in the center of the castle. Local book. Ravenclaw didn't care about Seal, and he continued, this is the crystallization of our four wisdoms, and its function is very simple, that is, it can help people improve by force, can you understand? Muggles become wizards. The wizard becomes an elemental magician, and the elemental magician becomes a demigod. Even when the three of them left before me, I added a function to it, which is to elect the principal. Only through the selection of the headmaster can you truly become the master of Hogwarts, and Hogwarts can truly help others improve. Do you understand when I say this? Seal feels that his three views have been broken again in such a short period of time. What did Seal hear just now? Turn muggles into wizards. What kind of melon could have been treated like this by Hogwarts? But then Charles thought of a question and asked weakly with a trembling voice, "Can I ask? Headmaster Dumbledore, my master, has he passed the test too?" Hearing Seal's question, Ravenclaw's eyes dimmed rarely, and he shook his head before continuing, "No, but over the years, that little guy Dumbledore has persisted the longest and won the A part of Hogwarts acknowledges that in millennia no one has really passed the ordeal to get help from Hogwarts. If I have to say it, Dumbledore begged me to let a muggle get a small part of Hogwarts help because of some reasons, that's all." Hearing this, the corners of Seal's mouth began to tremble. If nothing else, Seal should have guessed why Ravenclaw called him here. "You want me to be tested?" Seal asked uncertainly. Hearing Seal's question, Ravenclaw smiled and nodded, "Yes, since you are the only one who has practiced the elements according to the traditional method. I think you have great hopes, don't you? But my teacher, Dumbledore, is still there. If I pass the test, what will he do?" Charles asked impatiently. He didn't want Old Deng to lose his job because of his own reasons. If it was true, Charles will definitely die of guilt. Hearing Seal's words, the smile on Ravenclaw's face grew stronger. He smiled and looked at the nervous Seal across from him and said, "It doesn't matter, that little guy Armando Dippet also brought a Dumbledore cane, and Hogwarts does not exclude the current headmaster from electing his successor." Chapter 247 The Golden Book of Hogwarts. Hearing Ravenclaw's words, Seal didn't know how to refute for a while. To be honest, Seal actually felt that he was not enough to become the heir of Hogwarts or something. Ravenclaw clearly saw the hesitation on Seal's face at once, and said to Seal with a smile, "Try it, you won't lose anything anyway, right? The only true elemental magician Mr. Listening to Ravenclaw's obviously mocking tone, Seal suddenly recalled the incident when Slytherin sealed himself. The huge lack of security and comfort made Seal feel a wave of what life is like. Sinister. The corners of Seal's mouth twitched as he looked at Ravenclaw, who stepped aside to signal for Seal to step forward. "There was a feeling that if you were going to ignore me, I had a way to clean up you." Shaking his head helplessly, Seal stood on top of the golden giant book with a hint of a hero who was gone forever, staring blankly at Ravenclaw, who was standing beside him smiling. "What should I do?" "Do?" Ravenclaw looked at Seal with a smile, and there seemed to be a hint of ill will in his eyes. Unfortunately, Seal's attention was completely attracted by the golden book in front of him at this time, and he didn't see Raven at all. The smirk in Crow's eyes. "It's very simple, just put your hand on it." Hearing Ravenclaw's instructions, Seal raised his hand slowly, and at the moment when Seal was about to touch the golden book, Seal stopped almost as if he had turned over. Seal raised his hand blankly and looked at Ravenclaw beside him with suspicion. "Are you sure there's nothing wrong with it?" Ravenclaw looked at Seal with sincerity in his eyes. "I'm sure, don't worry." "Really? Really? Are you sure?" "I'm sure." During the extreme pulling, Seal did not find any flaws. When he was still hesitating, Seal felt as if his back had been pushed back by someone, and his hand touched the golden giant in an instant. On the pages of the book. Seeing Seal encountering the golden giant book Hogwarts, Ravenclaw's originally smiling face changed immediately, looking at Seal, who seemed to be unconscious with a hint of vicissitudes. "The real elemental mage in the prophecy, I hope you will really help Hogwarts and this magical world through the monstrous darkness as the prophecy story says. That's all we can do." After speaking, Ravenclaw sighed softly and disappeared into the room, leaving a vague comment that the child seemed to be overly cautious. After Ravenclaw disappeared, there was only the occasional crackling of the torch and Seal touching the golden giant book in a daze. The words were talking about Seal's side. After someone pushed him, Ciel's hand suddenly touched the golden giant book, and then Ciel felt a familiar feeling of swirling around the sky. Then it was dark in front of my eyes, and then I didn't know anything. In a daze, Ciel heard a scream, a man's roar, followed by a familiar sound of an ambulance. Everything gave Ciel an inexplicable sense of familiarity. But after all, he couldn't hold back the feeling of spinning around that day, and Ciel couldn't even eat anymore, opened his eyes to see what was going on around him, and lost consciousness again. I don't know how long it took for Ciel to wake up again. After opening his eyes in a daze, Ciel's first reaction was that he had traveled through again. Looking at the pure white ceiling, Charles felt a little dazed for a while. Before Charles could react, a woman's voice came to his mind, "Doctor. Doctor, come and see, he's awake." Ciel, who had just woken up, turned his head weakly to look at the place where the voice came out, and then a familiar feeling pierced into Ciel's mind like a needle. "Mom." She recommended Ciel's call. The middle-aged woman seemed to have heard the most beautiful music of some event, and her eyes burst into tears, wanting to touch Ciel, but she didn't dare. He kept responding to Ciel's calls. "Hey, my mother is here. My dear, my mother is here. Do you have any discomfort? The doctor will come later." After a while, a large group of white coats rushed over and began to check on Shah-er, who was watching all this in a daze. It took a long time for Ciel to understand the situation. It turns out that since he was struck by lightning, Ciel has fallen into a coma. This coma lasted for nearly a month. Fortunately, now Ciel is safe and sound. "Come over." Listening to everyone's rambling narration, Ciel's brain began to confuse for a while, and secretly pinched his thigh with a hard forehead. It hurts." After confirming that he was not dreaming, Ciel felt extremely disappointed for a moment, as if he had had a very real dream. In the dream, he was Dumbledore's apprentice and Hermione's childhood sweetheart. Ciel felt really complicated at this time, and he didn't know what kind of expression to use to meet the current situation. Almost subconsciously, Ciel almost followed instinct and wiped it to his waist, which seemed to be a habit developed in the magical world. Only with a wand in hand can Ciel feel a real sense of security. But it was a pity that this time Ciel didn't touch anything except the hospital gown. In an instant, a huge sense of loss mixed with uneasiness enveloped Ciel like a flood. Ciel got a little excited and began to rummage around constantly. Seeing Ciel's excited appearance, the invisible people were startled and didn't understand why Ciel became so emotional all of a sudden. Started to consider whether to give Ciel a shot of calm. Fortunately, the leading old doctor was still very experienced. After thinking about it, he walked to the cabinet beside Ciel's bed, took out a wrinkled box with blisters on the back, opened it and put it in front of Ciel. Ciel looked at the contents in the box, and immediately became quiet. After the old doctor sighed helplessly, he said, "I think this must be something very important to you, when you were taken by the ambulance." When he pulled it over, he still held it tightly in his hand. "I don't know what this is, but I subconsciously feel that this thing is very important to you, but because of the required inspection, we still took it out for you and put it away for you. It took a lot of effort at the time." The old doctor was talking to Ciel, but Ciel didn't hear a word. He stared blankly at the box, which had become charred black. Many places had been struck by lightning, and the metal rod of the wand had leaked out in a daze. After a long time, the first tears flowed out of Ciel's sluggish eyes for no reason, and all of a sudden dripped onto the wand that had turned into a carbon stick. Chapter 248-Dream On. Ciel was discharged from the hospital the next day. He was sober. Accompanied by his chattering mother, Ciel returned to his house before he passed through with the things he used in the hospital. The house was still as clean as new. As soon as he entered the door, Ciel saw that a large table of meals had already been prepared on the table, and his father, whose hair was all white, was busy in the kitchen. The first words after seeing the mother and son of Ciel came in. "That is, I am back. Wait a moment, there's one more dish to finish." Looking at all this, Ciel always felt unreal for some unknown reason. He subconsciously touched the magic wand that had been turned into a carbon stick that he put on his waist. For some unknown reason, Seal always felt that this thing it is extremely important, and in the end, I was not willing to throw it away. The mother responded to the father's voice very happily, put the things in her hands on the ground, turned around to take the things in the hands of Seal, and said to Seal, "Go back to your room to rest first. I'll clean up the things. When you are recovering from a serious illness, you need a good rest." Quote. Seal nodded dumbly, then returned to his room like a walking corpse and sat beside the bed staring blankly at himself in the mirror. At this time, Seal no longer had the elf-like appearance in the magical world. Some are just plain little fat people before the time travel. But it is not indistinguishable. Thanks to the coma for more than a month, at this time, Seal has successfully escaped from the ranks of the little fat man. Even because he was struck by lightning, Seal's right hand has countless thunder marks from the fingers. One spread to Seal's heart. The whole thunder pattern looks like a flower arm, but Seal can guarantee that there is absolutely no tattoo studio that can create the same flower arm. The thunder pattern on Sha'ur's arm is full of natural beauty, as if it should be born. Where is the same? Thinking of this, Seal couldn't help laughing at himself. In fact, Seal didn't know what he was laughing at. The memory in his mind named Seal was like his own experience, deeply engraved in his mind. Even now, Seal still remembers many spells that were not spoken in Harry Potter. Before Seal could think about it, his father's voice came from the kitchen, telling Seal to go to dinner. Seal walked to the kitchen in a sluggish manner, and now Seal has begun to be a little confused whether he had a dream or really crossed over. Seeing Seal walking over in a daze, his father didn't seem surprised. He greeted Seal with a smile to sit down, turned around and took out a bottle of white wine from the wine cabinet. Before his mother was paying attention, he quietly approached him. Charles said in front of him, "Let's have a drink today, before your mother pays attention. Don't say not to drink, this is the first time for us to drink. Let me tell you, you stinky boy has good luck. It can make your father except for the New Year's and festivals, the one who cooks is you." Quote. The old father poured out a small glass of wine for Seal, and then he happily brought a glass to himself, and greeted Seal to taste his craftsmanship quickly. Seal was a little surprised. According to his memory before the time traveled, his father had never had a drink with him, so he picked up the wine glass and took a sip. The spicy wine was like a raging fire. All the memories before the time travel were awakened. Putting down the wine glass, Seal took a sip of the dish. The familiar taste repeatedly stimulated Seal's taste buds, and Seal's tears flowed out all of a sudden. This smell is the smell that Seal wakes up countless times and wants to restore it, but no matter how hard he tries, he can't restore it. Seeing that Seal was crying, the old father put down his glass and said to Seal in a low voice, "Don't be in such a hurry. If your mother finds out, she will probably start talking about me again." Seal nodded, took up his rice bowl and started to eat, while his father carefully rambled about some of the things that happened after Seal was hospitalized. The mother was busy packing things behind Seal. After seeing his father's actions, she didn't say anything. Instead, a faint smile hung on the corner of her mouth. After resting at home for a few days, Sha'ur returned to the state of being a busy social animal in his previous life. It is also amazing to say that after Sha'urching took a month's sick leave, the company did not open Sha'ur. Makes Seal feel amazing. Every day was flat, and there was very little that touched Seal's heart. He kept repeating the days before the time travel. There was no Voldemort, no teacher Dumbledore, no cute childhood sweetheart Hermione, and no magical magic. Everything seems to be a dream. Those who make Seal worried, resentful and grateful are like people in movies or books, and they have never appeared in Seal's life. It seemed that everything was so peaceful and so natural. It's just that there is always a thorn in Seal's head. No matter what, the memory in the magic world is as deep as a thorn in Seal's mind, although the love his parents gave to Seal has eased that. There was a discordant feeling like a tingling, but the memory was like a ghost hovering in Seal's mind from time to time. Seal could clearly remember the amazing feeling when he saw Hermione for the first time. He could also clearly remember the surprise of the first time he got the wand and used magic. He could also clearly remember that he was so smug that he opened the door for the first time. What he saw was the surprise of a white-bearded Dumbledore. After more than a month of wasting, tangled, and thinking, Seal decided to use his own way to record his legend, whether it was a dream or a real time travel. When he was not sure about the situation, the best way is not to write down what you think. This is almost the only thing that Seal can do. It is like a beam of light, shining in the repeated life of Seal's previous life, accompanied by the constant records of Seal. Slowly, Seal doesn't seem to be so confused anymore, and he is no longer so confused. The smile returned to Seal's face again. The parents around him never said that they wanted to go back to their hometown because they were worried about Seal's body. Has been by Charles's side. I don't know why, along with Seal's record, Seal seems to be able to feel a powerful force emerging from his body, and this force has been supporting Seal. Time passed by on Seal's keyboard, until one afternoon a month later, the resting Seal was still sitting on his desk and writing about his life, and his father and mother went out to buy vegetables to celebrate Seal's discharge from the hospital. A month. The magic wand that was split into a carbon rod by lightning was placed next to Seal's computer. After Seal finished coding, and after a deep slack, the wand on the table jumped for no reason. Before Seal could react, a voice that was both familiar and unfamiliar rang in Seal's ear. How long do you want to escape? Chapter 249_dream below. Hearing this voice, Seal gave a wry smile and slowly turned around. Standing behind Seal was the elf-like self. At this time, the elf Seal looked at the man sitting in front of the table coldly with his hands behind his back. Seal, who has regained a little fat figure. To be honest, if you don't come out, I really want to sink in for a while. Little Fatty Seal answered Elven Seal honestly, and after hearing Little Fatty Seal's answer, Elf Seal frowned involuntarily and looked at Little Fatty Seal coldly. Mouth asked. You know it all. Little Fatty Charles gave a wry smile, yes. Hearing Seal's answer, the Elf Seal's brows furrowed even more deeply, and he looked at the fat little Seal with some doubts. How did you see it? I should have done it perfectly. Hearing the words of Elf Seal, Little Fatty Seal smiled indifferently, turned around and picked up the wand that had turned into charcoal, shook it, smiled bitterly, and then continued. Actually, I was confused at first, but when I started to organize my memory and write it down, I already remembered everything, and the events of that night. That thunderbolt that made me pass through, to be honest, it is still shocking in retrospect. I am still quite confident that I would never survive under such natural pressure as I neglected to exercise in my previous life. By the way, what should I call you, Hogwarts? Ravenclaw, or Master Wand? Hearing Seal's question, Elven Seal's frown finally loosened, and he shook his head and said to the real fat little Seal, Call me Hogwarts, this is what my creator gave me. My name, although many people like to call the whole castle that way these days. Hearing Hogwarts answer, Seal smiled and did it again, turning his back to Hogwarts, constantly fiddling with the wand in his hand, and then continued. To be honest, I am very grateful to you. You let me see the person I care about again, and taste the taste of my heart again. Hearing Shire's words, Hogwarts frowned again, and replied indifferently, What? Don't want to go back? Charles just smiled and shook his head. No, it's a pity, but it's no surprise that I've already died in that world, right? But I'm still alive in this world. I have my parents who love me, and my childhood sweethearts. Good friends, respected teachers, everything is telling me that I can't stay here. Hearing Shire's words, Hogwarts frowned even more deeply. Since you already know that, why don't you break free? Charles just smiled and answered Hogwarts' words. It's very simple, because I owe it, although I know it's all fake, but I still want to know what dishes my parents will bring back when they come back. I want to have another meal with them, and I want to drink and chat with them. Quote. Hearing Seal's answer, Hogwarts looked at Seal with a thoughtful look on his face, and after a long while, Hogwarts continued, It seems that you are no different from the previous challengers. The answer they gave me was the same. Hearing what Hogwarts said, Seal burst into laughter, as if he had heard something ridiculous. After laughing for a long time, Seal covered his stomach and waved his hand. No, 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 I think I am with you. They are definitely different, trust me. Quote. After finishing speaking, Seal stood up holding the Coke wand in his hand with sharp eyes, staring at Hogwarts, who had transformed into himself. Seeing Shire's appearance, Hogwarts was obviously interested. Oh, this is the first time I've seen this reaction. Ha 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 ha, you managed to arouse my interest. Seal didn't speak, and still looked coldly at Hogwarts opposite him, who had transformed into his own appearance. Hogwarts didn't care about Seal's unfriendliness at this time. After laughing for a while, he waved his hand, his face became serious, and he looked at Seal. Seriously, I'm so hungry. I didn't expect you to be like this. I changed my mind. I decided to give you a choice. You can choose to stay here forever. I promise, this is the real world for you. Absolutely, there will be no deviations. Or, now I'll wake you up right now and tell the truth. Your grades have surpassed anyone I've ever tested, including my creator, Ms. Ravenclaw. Choose. I want to see your final decision. Hogwarts said that at the end. He looked at Seal with a frenzied expression on his face, and he happily opened his hands as if waiting for Seal to make his own choice. After Seal heard Hogwarts' words, he gradually lowered his head, as if he was thinking, but gradually, Hogwarts realized something was wrong. As for the reason, it was very simple. The wind was blowing. There was a slight breeze in the airtight environment of the Shire family in the previous life. Gradually, the breeze became stronger and stronger. Only then did Seal raise his head, with a breathtaking smile on his face, staring at Hogwarts, who was standing opposite him with his hands open and stunned. No, I think I chose the third way. After speaking, a gust of wind mixed with flames began to emerge from Seal's feet for no reason. At the same time, in Benton in the Earth Rabbit country, the sun just rose from the horizon, and a woman with a lonely face with almost gray hair woke up from the bed. At this time, she sat on the bed blankly, as if trying to remember what. Soon after, a man with white hair pushed open the bedroom door. I bought breakfast, let's get up and have some food. The woman nodded, and then grabbed the man's arm as if she had caught some life-saving straw. I dreamed of our child. I dreamed that I took him out of the hospital, and you gave him a medical treatment. The table was delicious and we seemed to be back in the old days. We lived together for a whole month, and at the last time, he stood beside us both, constantly asking Jongmi about the cooking process. Then, after having a good meal with us, I kowtowed 3 times to you and kept telling us to pay attention to our bodies, and that we should stop thinking about him and go out for more walks. As she spoke, the woman broke down in tears. After listening to the woman's words, the man didn't say anything, just sat down blankly, picked up the cigarette on the head of the bed and lit a cigarette, and then said slowly. To be honest, I had this dream of yours last night. Chapter 250-Weather outside the castle. Hermione felt that her mood was getting worse and worse recently. When Hermione was doing her homework in the library a few days ago, she suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen Seal for almost a week. After hurriedly asking Harry, Ron and Ciel's roommates, Hermione found out that Seal had been missing for a week. Although Seal would disappear for a few days inexplicably due to the reasons arranged by Dumbledore in the past, not only Hermione but also the teacher were used to it, but this time he disappeared for so long for no reason. It was the first time that Hermione had encountered the situation. After a night of insomnia and ideological struggles, Hermione decided to go to Professor McGonagall to report the situation. Poor Professor McGonagall didn't even realize that Seal had disappeared for so long. It was after the beginning of this semester that Dumbledore had arranged too many things for Seal. After listening to Hermione's report, Professor McGonagall comforted him. After a while, Hermione frowned and went to her irresponsible principal. Hermione could only sit in Professor McGonagall's office with a worried expression, frowning and waiting for a reply. Not long after, Professor McGonagall came back with an angry look on her face, and also returned. "Tell Hermione to go to the headmaster's office." Obviously, Professor McGonagall and Dumbledore did not reach a consensus on the issue of Seal in the principal's office. Fortunately, it is not the time to start school, otherwise, Dumbledore may not really dare to talk to McGonagall. What quarrel happened with Professor J? After Hermione was taken to the principal's room by Professor McGonagall, she pushed open the door of the principal's room with an uneasy mood. Fortunately, Dumbledore was not as serious as Professor McGonagall, but an invitation with a smile on his face. Hermione sat down, and also took out his favorite cockroach pile and invited Hermione to taste it together. Hermione looked at the pile of cockroaches on Dumbledore's table, which was really unpalatable. After a few perfunctory words, Dumbledore told her with a smile that Seal was carrying out a very important challenge. "It should be about halfway through now, tell Hermione not to worry." He even wanted to ask Hermione to give Seal half a favor. As for why, that's a question, of course, it's Buckbeak's business. In return for his help, Dumbledore promised Hermione not to worry by telling her about what Seal had done this term when she was done. Fugitive, without Sirius, the Dementors around Hogwarts had already withdrawn, and there was no safety at this time. Question. What's more, this matter can still help Hagrid. Hermione took Harry as a helper, and in the short time before the execution, he used the time converter to complete the task of helping Buckbeak escape perfectly. After that, Dumbledore also kept his promise and told Hermione what he did this semester. Of course, it was an abridged version. After all, he was the only one who knew about the test that Seal was currently undergoing. The secret he couldn't tell. As for the progress of Seal's test, through his magical contract with Hogwarts, Dumbledore can actually sense exactly what progress Seal is currently in. As for Hermione, after knowing what Seal had done this semester, she opened her mouth in surprise and returned to the dormitory in a daze. After all, according to Dumbledore's words, Seal would not be back for a while. Time passed by in Hermione's worries like this. Everyone seemed to be used to Seal's departure, and even without Seal's suppression, Malfoy's provocation towards the trio became more and more rampant. The only thing that has changed recently is probably the weather. Ever since Hermione came back from the headmaster's office after knowing what Shire had done this semester, the goddamn weather has gotten worse day by day. Even now, the dark clouds in the sky have completely blocked the existence of the sun, and countless little wizards are late for the morning class. The reason is very simple. Anyone who opens his eyes and sees the dark window will think that it's still night, isn't it? This kind of day lasted for a week, until one day after a week, the dark clouds in the sky repeatedly suppressed the beast for a long time, and began to roll over and over again. After a while, the thunder in the sky was like rain. The constant banging sounded. Even after noon, it became more and more intense, almost like a city. The little wizards in the castle had no intention of attending classes in the afternoon, and they all began to discuss what happened. Even Hermione felt a little irritable because of the weather. At night, a huge thunder suddenly hit the open space around Hogwarts, and the huge thunder column instantly illuminated the entire castle almost indistinguishable from the daytime. In the ensuing time, as if a hole had been opened by this thunder, one after another thunder hit the castle and the ground around Hogwarts continuously. In view of this situation, Professor McGonagall quickly ordered everyone to gather in the auditorium to avoid the thunder in the sky. Of course, Hermione was also among them, and her face was full of worry. For some reason, he always had a hunch that this disaster must have something to do with Seal. In fact, Hermione's guess was completely correct. At this time, Seal was in the room of requirement, still holding the gesture of touching the golden giant book, motionless. The only other possibility is that the expression of unconscious pain constantly appeared on Seal's face. If Dumbledore or Grindelwald were to die, they would definitely find that the magic power on Seal at this time was like a flood. It kept pouring towards the golden giant book. Fortunately, the Sorcerer's Stone on Seal's body provided him with a steady stream of huge magic power. Otherwise, according to this kind of hair absorption, within a short time, Seal would definitely become a human. Of course, this state didn't last long, but after a while, with a crisp cracking sound, the torrent of magic power that was like a surging river suddenly turned into a torrent of elements. The surrounding elements began to gather towards Shire's body as if they had seen a dry sponge, and the huge torrent of elements even caused a small vibration of the entire Hogwarts castle. After feeling the torrent and vibration of the huge element, Dumbledore, who was sitting in the principal's room, was suddenly startled, and immediately turned around and ran to a giant screen upstairs. After the giant painting was twisted in front of Dumbledore, it began to move inexplicably. After a while, the entire giant painting turned into a gate. And the core of Hogwarts, where the official Shire is located in the door, the core of Hogwarts hidden in the Room of Requirement, is also the burial place of Ravenclaw. However, what caught Dumbledore's eyes was not a seal, but a giant cocoon exuding colorful light. Chapter 251-248 Sheets Legend of the Wand. At this time, Seal was sitting in the headmaster's room drinking tea with Dumbledore, and the weather at Hogwarts became clear because of Seal's appearance, and even the moon had already hung in the sky at this time. The little wizards have returned to their respective beds and are ready to sleep peacefully. The entire Hogwarts seems to have returned to its original appearance. The only thing that is still brightly lit may only be this small headmaster's room and the division of Seal and Dumbledore. 2 disciples. To tell the truth about what Dumbledore saw just now, it was the first time Dumbledore had seen it in such an old age. Not long after Dumbledore entered the Room of Requirement, a gap opened in the colorful cocoon, and before Dumbledore could react, Seal climbed out of it naked. It's like a little dragon that just crawled out of a dragon's egg, but the only difference is that at this time, Seal has 5 rings on his right hand, and one from the 4 Hogwarts houses from the index finger to the little finger. The hospital emblem, while on the thumb is an oval ruby ring. Each of the 4 hospital badges has a chain in its mouth, which is connected to the Hogwarts school badge on a bracelet on the wrist, while the thumb is a chain that extends below the ruby and is connected to the school badge. As for the left hand should be holding the original wand, but unfortunately the current wand has turned into a coke stick that is exactly the same as in Char's dream. Seal struggled to get up, just waved his hand, and a flame appeared out of thin air. By the time the flame disappeared, Seal had already put on his clothes, and everything seemed like nothing happened just now. If Dumbledore hadn't just seen everything, and just listened to people describe it, Dumbledore would have thought everything that had just happened was just a joke. At this time, Dumbledore was holding a teacup in his hand and looked at Seal on the opposite side, while Seal was looking at his wand, which was already dead, and then at the very feminine thing in his hand, and the corners of his mouth twitched from time to time. Only then did I remember the meaning of that guy's half-smiley, bad-smelling expression when he conquered the giant book he transformed into. After a long time, Dumbledore put down the teacup, looked at Seal and said, "Tell me what happened." When Seal heard Dumbledore's words, he temporarily put down this extremely feminine certificate and whether the ruby represented Azkaban's complaints, and raised his head to answer Dumbledore's question. "No, teacher, very simple, I passed the Hogwarts test." After speaking, he did not forget to twitch the certificate in his hand, and then continued, "This thing is the certificate of passing the test, and..." Seal paused for a while, looking at the wand that had turned into coke on the table with some reluctance, and then continued, "And the thing that replaces the wand, I don't know what it should be called, I only know that this thing will be in the I will return to that great golden book after I die, waiting for the next heir." After hearing Seal's words, Dumbledore's eyes were fascinated, and he noticed the expression Seal looked at his wand, and then he continued, "Can you elaborate?" Seal shrugged, and then continued, "How do I say it? I can't tell you the specific test process. You should have known this rule when you became the principal, but after passing the test, all I can know is, my wand has done its job, and secondly, as the person with the credential, I've almost got the most access to the whole of Hogwarts." Dumbledore smiled after hearing Seal's words, and leaned back on the back of the chair very relaxed, then continued, "Ha ha ha ha, congratulations, I knew you would definitely surpass me. Then isn't it time to retire now? Hearing Dumbledore's ridicule, Seal twitched the corners of his mouth and said helplessly, Teacher, if we don't joke, we are still good teachers and apprentices. Seeing Ciel's appearance, Dumbledore burst into laughter, and after a long time, he slowly recovered, waved at Ciel, and then said, Okay, let's get down to business. The wand has completed its mission. What's going on? Hearing that Dumbledore was not joking and began to be serious, Ciel also put aside his joking attitude and then continued. Teacher, after I finished the test, I had a magical experience. It was like I became the Big Four. You know, their whole life experience. 4 people, not a lot of them are all here. Ciel pointed to his head while speaking, and then continued. After I experienced the complete life of 4 people, I naturally found one thing. You may not believe it very much, teacher, I could feel my wand cheering around my waist. I can feel his emotions. So almost subconsciously, I held the wand, and the wand seemed to be able to feel something, and it also gave me a feeling, what should I say? A complex emotion that is like a child who has grown up and is about to travel far away. After that, I could clearly feel that a power different from the elements emerged in the wand. This power is higher than the elements but can be quickly merged into the elements. Ciel raised his hands as he spoke, and as Ciel's voice fell, a huge thunder pillar appeared between Ciel's hands and kept beating. Dumbledore couldn't help staring at Ciel's operation, but he didn't interrupt Ciel, and Ciel continued, Teacher, the original purpose of wands may not be to assist wizards. Good spellcasting, but to help wizards push their limits. As if the thunderbolts in my hand were not of the elements. This reminds me of one thing. Does the teacher remember what Ollivander said about it? Wands choose wizards. After Ciel finished speaking, he dissipated the thunder and lightning from his hands and fanned the unpleasant ozone around his nose. Just as he was about to continue speaking, the Sorting Hat, which was originally on the shelf, spoke first. Little Charles, congratulations on your mastery of the natural elements. As I said, I really am a perfect observer. As for what little Charles said, Dumbledore, I can tell you with certainty, little Charles said is not wrong. The magic wand was invented to help magicians break through the upper limit. It was a thing made by a few masters of natural elements like Little Ciel at the time of the end of the law. Of course, where muggles called them demigods. It's just that the wizards became obsessed with the convenience brought by wands and gradually forgot about these things. Chapter 252_Metamorphosis. Hearing the Sorting Hat's words, the master and the apprentice fell silent unconsciously, but Ciel was silent for a while, and then he waved his hand and used magic to make the Sorting Hat off the shelf next to him. On the contrary, after listening to the Sorting Hat, Dumbledore looked at the elder wand he put on the table and Ciel's charred wand that had completed his mission for a long time, not knowing what he was thinking alone. After frolicking with the Sorting Hat for a while, Ciel put the Sorting Hat on top of his head. After all, no boy can refuse a talking hat, right? What's more, with Ciel's current status as the Lord of Hogwarts, the Sorting Hat couldn't take the initiative to probe what Ciel was thinking, and the two of them were more of a joke. Ciel also seemed to have noticed that Dumbledore had been looking at his elder wand, as if he was thinking about something. Seeing that Dumbledore's brows were getting tighter and tighter, Ciel said, Don't think too much, teacher, whether it's the elder wand or your original wand, it's a magic wand, isn't it? What's more, if it's really like the fairy tale, maybe you really let the elder wand accomplish its original mission. Are you still taking over the authority of the God of Death? Then don't forget to let me and Hermione live for a while longer. My backer is too big, Death God. My teacher. Then I'm not staring at who is pregnant. Hearing Ciel's consolation like a gag, Dumbledore's frown gradually loosened, and he looked at Ciel with a bit of a musing, but reluctantly and a little disgustedly complained, Look at what you are doing. But Dumbledore also had to admit that after Ciel finished speaking, Dumbledore also thought about it. Whether the mission of the wand or the elder wand, he has really touched this threshold or crossed it. The person who is Ciel is one, and he is now 2 elements. After all, he was too ambitious. After Dumbledore sighed in his heart, he laughed and talked to Seal about what happened recently. When they said it was fun, the master and the apprentice laughed happily, and when they said they were troubled, the master and apprentice were also worried together. When it came to Hermione, Old Dang laughed and looked at Seal in a state of displeasure. I don't know how long it took, and the moon in the sky gradually leaned against the sky, and Seal yawned. Dumbledore also knew that it was too late, so he said to Seal, "Okay, go to bed, and come back to me after your final exam." "It's still too late." Sherson nodded lazily, but just as he was about to get up, Dumbledore stopped Sheer again and handed out a note. Hill looked at the note carefully, but did not take it. He smiled and said to Dumbledore, "Teacher, I can't use such a curfew note now." After that, Seal started to crackle and flashed lightning, which means this is the magical world. If it was Muggle time, maybe DC would invite Seal to play the role of the Flash. This guy has all the special effects. Forget it, it's even better than the special effects. After seeing Seal's actions, Dumbledore smiled helplessly, but looked at Seal with relief. "Charles, I don't know what kind of test you have gone through, but I think after you come back, became a lot more real." Quote. Seal was still proudly showing off his new natural element, but after hearing Dumbledore's words, he was stunned for a moment, and the flashing lightning on his body disappeared. After a long time, Seal smiled, looked at Dumbledore and replied, "Maybe I have a wish instead." After he finished speaking, he carefully put the sorting hat on top of his head on the shelf, and then disappeared into the principal's room as a white light with the sound of crackling lightning. Dumbledore didn't expect Seal to answer like this, so he was stunned for a moment, but he laughed immediately after Seal left, just like a grandfather who knew that his younger generation was very good and promising. Smiling slowly, he walked upstairs, laughing and talking about the child growing up while walking. As for Seal, he appeared on the small bed in his room with the thunder light, waved his hand, and the clothes on his body turned into flames again and disappeared. Seal immediately got into his little quilt, thanking Hogwarts there is a cover on C's bed, otherwise, nothing will really happen tomorrow morning. Seal, who just got into the bed, did not fall asleep as quickly and peacefully as in the phenomenon, but turned over and couldn't fall asleep. The reason is very simple. Just like what Dumbledore said, after this test, Seal became a lot more real. Which indirectly led to the feeling that Seal's life in the past few years was like a copy in a very real game. But that test, that month's life experience, even though it was fake, Seal could really feel that he had truly said goodbye to his previous life. The uneasy feeling in his heart has now calmed down, and all Seal can do is pray continuously for his parents in this world. Seal even thought of his past in the middle of the night, whether his parents, Hermione, Harry and Ron in this world, all of them without exception are now tolerant of their own willfulness. Thinking of this, the corner of Seal's mouth couldn't help showing a smile, and Seal recalled the care of the William and his wife, Harry and Ron's jokes, and the eccentric Hermione. It looks like it's better to apologize to them tomorrow. While talking, Charles fell into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, Seal's return caused a stir in a small area. How small is the area? Hermione, Harry, Ron, 3, plus some Slytherin students. Especially Hermione, the moment she saw Seal, she almost sprinted to Seal and hugged Seal, constantly asking if there was anything wrong with Seal. All of a sudden, Seal was a little confused, but this time, Seal did not continue to fool the three of them as before. As the day passed, whether it was Hermione or Harry and Ron, the three everyone has a real feeling, that is, the Seal he is facing has suddenly become real, and it is no longer as cloudy as before. Seal's changes and people are still very popular, especially Hermione. Maybe it's Seal's intention, maybe it's Seal's unintentional, I don't know why now Seal, who has transformed and returned, can always feel ashamed unconsciously. How to say, sultry in the invisible. Anyway, apart from Hermione, almost all the three boys didn't care much about this matter. As for the reason, it was very simple. The final exam was coming. Chapter 253 _ exams and end of term. The evening of the second day, Seal walked out of the examination room with a face like, "Fuck, can you still play like this? Why is this happening?" Quite simply, because the proctoring of the afternoon exam made Seal a little suspicious of life. The written test in the morning was not bad. After all, Seal still listened to a lot of things. Although he was absent for the last month, he still felt that the written test in the morning was very easy because of his interest in magic. I don't want to think about the name, and I can mix it up to the point of passing the last time. What really made Seal feel bad was the practical exam in the afternoon. When Seal lined up into the exam room and waved his hand, which he didn't know whether to call it a ring or an ornament, he performed a wave of perfect transfiguration. The little wizard in the back began to make noises from time to time. Why is this? Very simple. In their opinion, Seal is pure magic without a magic wand. Although Seal can also be said to be a human-shaped mobile wand after possessing natural elements, even children of Seal can use a wand with the core of Seal's hair, but unfortunately others do not know about it. So in their opinion, this is a great god performing magic without sticks. All the little wizards who were watching were only looking at Hanako, and even later, many invigilators were looking at Seal with curious eyes. Even later, Dumbledore was alarmed by this incident. The final result was that after everyone had finished the test, he opened a small stove for Seal to take the test and explained the current Seal to the teachers. The situation also demonstrated a wave of its own thunder and lightning elements on the spot. This wave of show, the others were okay, but Professor Phileas Flitwick, who taught the magic spell class, had a climax. He dragged Seal and began to discuss topics such as elemental magic constantly, even a big one. With a single flick of the pen, Seal's charm class got full marks. According to Professor Flitwick, as a qualified and the only natural element possessed by Seal, there is almost no magic that Seal needs to learn except for life magic, not to mention that compared to Seal of the charms class, Professor Flitwick seems to be interested in the natural elements of the Shire. Fortunately, with Professor Flitwick's fuss, no one cared about the reason for Seal's wandless spellcasting. All the professors seemed to be interested in being promoted to elemental mage. After Seal made countless promises to absolutely cooperate with the research in the next semester, the professors let Seal leave with satisfaction, but what they didn't know was that Seal was able to cast magic so smoothly and so naturally. The credit goes to Seal's right hand. That's right, it's that very feminine and Ravenclaw's aesthetic one-piece ring and bracelet. In fact, according to Seal's current prompt, it's not too rare to want to cast spells without a cane, and you can do it at any time, nothing more than it's just power. To give a simple example, for example, Seal does not have this accessory. In the state without a staff, Seal can use 90% of the power of fire element magic, but after having this accessory, Seal can easily use it. That number doubles to 180%. In this world where all the ancient artifacts, the demigods and the real gods in the mouths of muggles in those days disappeared, it was a real incense for Seal to have this magic wand-like thing. Otherwise, Seal might really have to find a way to see if he can restore something like the legendary magician's wand. Not to mention the real thing, even the records in this era of Shire are pitiful. As for why Seal doesn't continue to choose wands, this question is simpler. Let's not talk about whether there is any wand who dares to choose the natural element mage of Seal. It is true, the powerful thunder element is estimated that even the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's hand is a consumable that will be thrown away after 1 or 2 magic shots. To put it bluntly, it is a sentence, the wand is not for Seal at this stage, unless it is used as a consumable. When he heard the news, Seal thought about the exchange limit of Gringotts and his stingy 100 galleons, as well as the weight of Dumbledore's wallet opposite him. After thinking carefully, he gave up. I want to hide my thoughts. No knows. I'm not a man anymore. This sentence was probably the most real thought in Seal's mind at that time. Fortunately, although there were a lot of strange things, Seal still completed the assessment of his last easy semester perfectly and got a good evaluation. And Dumbledore also guaranteed that Seal would never let Seal get involved in any strange things this holiday, provided that Seal stayed in England at ease. As for the reason, Dumbledore is also very clear about the Triwizard hegemony next semester. At this time, Dumbledore has received the notice and will leave for the discussion in a few days. What worries Dumbledore the most is not the Triwizard tournament itself as the mixed forces and conspiracies behind this game. After listening to Dumbledore's words, for some reason, Seal couldn't help feeling that his summer vacation might really be the last calm before the storm. But then Seal put this question to the back: what conspiracies and tricks, what forces are fighting for hegemony, after a month of social life in the previous life and his own life in the past few years that can barely be called a student? Shaw is clear realized one thing. At present, even if Voldemort joined Dumbledore and Grindelwald to jump in front of Seal, it would not be able to stop Seal's desire to have a holiday. Not to mention that magic is an idealistic thing. Anyway, Seal is a feeling, and if anything prevents him from enjoying his vacation, Seal can make him feel what it means to be a god blocking a god, a Buddha blocking a Buddha. Even with the attitude of not wanting to delay my vacation when I come here, Charles and his friends finally boarded the Hogwarts train home safely. Charles, who was leaning against the window, looked at the scenery outside and listened to the sudden sound of jets from the front of the car, and in the bottom of his heart, Charles felt what was called happiness. To be honest, Seal had already started to miss the fried chicken burgers and Coke near the station at this time. If nothing else, just like Coke, it had already begun to make Seal imagine endlessly. As for Sprite, Fanta, Dr. Pepper, juice, etc., Shire couldn't imagine it, otherwise he would definitely look like a drooling pig brother at this time. This is actually not to blame for Shire. After all, look at the poor butterbeer, pumpkin juice and other things in the magic world, and compare which soda drinks I just mentioned. Well, basically there is no comparison. Chapter 254 on the way. Charlie's fantasies about soda didn't last long, when he was caught by a small owl outside the window. As for the reason, it was very simple. It looked like a juvenile owl was flapping its wings vigorously, chasing after the train. It seems that the target is exactly this private room in Seal. Charles suddenly remembered Ron's owl named Piglet, and looked in the carriage. Ron was complaining constantly with Harry and Hermione, and only after reading the newspaper did he realize that Scabbers was Peter Pettigrew, who actually slept with a murderer for years. Hermione and Harry were constantly comforting the aggrieved teenager who didn't like to read newspapers until now. After reading the news for a while, Charles silently opened the window and returned to his original position without saying anything. Fly in with the owl itself. After all, this thing Seal doesn't know how to speak. Think about it from another angle. If Seal was Ron, he would have slept in the same bed with a fat and greasy murderer for several years after learning. It is estimated that Seal will simply change his life in a different world, or he will take all the insiders to his Arvada regardless of whether he is degenerate or not. Otherwise, Seal's scalp will go numb just thinking about it. Now Ron just sat here in a panic and didn't commit suicide, which made Seal admire the big heart of this young man. Also, Seal really didn't know how to speak. Even Seal had no doubt that if he opened his mouth, Ron, who had come to him, might be obsessed with this. Pettigrew, who wasn't in Azkaban, was completely killed. Thinking of this, Seal couldn't help shivering. He rubbed the goosebumps on his arms that were frightened by his own thoughts. He silently returned to his original position and looked at the little owl that was still trying to flap its wings outside. Fortunately, several people didn't notice Seal's small movements, and the little owl didn't let Shaw wait for a long time. After a short while, it flapped its wings and landed on the table in the private room, in front of Grace. Ron seemed a little surprised by the owl that flew over suddenly. But after reading the letter on the owl's beak, Ron calmly picked up the owl with its head tilted and looked at him and sent it to Crookshanks. Crookshanks, do you see if this thing is an animagus? Ron's behavior suddenly made the two people who were still comforting Ron froze in place, not knowing what to say, but Crookshanks hiding in Hermione's arms and the underage owl used it. He looked at Ron with the look of your mental retardation. Ron held it up for a long time and saw that Crookshanks didn't respond. He seemed uneasy, and backhanded the owl to Seal, who had just closed the window. Ignoring the surprise on Seal's face, He scratched the back of his head a little embarrassedly, and said to Seal, "Charles, you know a lot. Help me to see if this thing is a real owl." Charles rolled his eyes at Ron, expressing that he didn't want to pay attention to this guy who could sleep with Peter Pettigrew for years, but he couldn't hold Ron's almost pleading look in his eyes. Seal could only flick his hand over the owl's head a few times, as if he was casting a spell, causing the little owl to stare at Seal curiously with big cute eyes. After a long time, Seal pretended to be exhausted and said to Ron, "Don't worry, it's not an animagus, this guy is really an owl." After hearing Seal's words, Ron was so happy that the owl, the smile on his face became more and more happy, and shouted at Harry and Hermione. "I have an owl. God, I can't believe it. I have a new owl. I'm going to call him Piglet." Seeing Ron's happy look, Harry hurriedly grabbed Ron, who was about to treat the little owl as the little Lion King, and started to inquire. Only then did he know that this was his godfather who he had never met because he caused Ron to lose his pet. Compensation made. After listening to Ron's explanation, Harry couldn't help but dim his eyes. His good friend Ron received gifts, but his godfather didn't even meet him. Hermione was still very smart. She suddenly found that Harry was hiding the darkness in her eyes. She approached Seal secretly, and whispered to Seal, "Harry is a little unhappy. Do you want to comfort him? You know you speak with almost unreserved trust in Harry." Hearing Hermione's words, Seal's mouth couldn't help evoking a wicked smile, and he approached Hermione's ear and whispered to Hermione, don't worry, how do you know Harry will my godfather give gifts to his favorite godson? How disappointed is Harry now that Harry will be happy later." Quote. Hearing Seal's words, Hermione was a little puzzled, but randomly Hermione understood what Seal meant, but the moment she wanted to understand, Hermione noticed Seal who was very close to her, and when Seal was talking breathing in your own ear. Almost all at once, Hermione's face flushed completely, and she lowered her head silently without saying anything. Seal didn't understand what happened to Hermione, but seeing Hermione's appearance, it was obvious that she didn't want to continue talking. So Seal silently went back and continued to enjoy the scenery outside the window. After a long time, Seal felt again that the corner of his clothes seemed to be pulled by someone, and looked at Hermione beside him with some doubts. Hermione had returned to normal at this time, and she cramped Seal again, but her curiosity about magic finally overcame her shyness, and she whispered to Seal with a blushing face, "What kind of magic did you use for Ron just now?" "Detected." Hearing Hermione's question, Seal froze for a moment, then burst out laughing, leaned closer to Hermione's ear again and whispered, "I'm going to kill him." Hearing Seal's answer, Hermione was also stunned for a moment. She looked at Seal with a shy and surprised look, then turned to look at Ron, who was thinking of the owl as Simba, and who was trying his best to stop Ron. Prophet. This time, Hermione couldn't help but burst out laughing. Time soon arrived at night along with the laughter in the carriage. When what Seal saw in the car window was no longer a field landscape and turned into a high-rise building, Seal knew that he had once again returned to the technology. In a world full of muggles. As the train stabilized, Seal stood up with a small suitcase containing Hermione and his own things. "Come on, I'll take you to a play, and then, I can't wait to try the station with you all. Burgers and Cokes." Quote. Chapter 255 The Station and the Beginning of the Holiday. Seal and Hermione followed Harry and Ron along the way, and it seemed that Seal had forgotten his craving for burgers just now. With the crowd, Shire and Hermione watched as Harry and Ron walked past the 3/4 of the platform's pillars, beckoned by the skinny station commander. Only then did the corner of Seal's mouth show a smile, grabbing Hermione's arm and walking over the pillar under the command of the old station clerk. When Shire and Hermione walked past the pillar, they saw Ron showing off his owl to his mother, and Harry was being hugged by a well-dressed but scrawny man who was constantly talking. He talked about how Harry was similar to Harry's father, and seeing Harry was like seeing Harry's father when he was a child. Hermione was a little confused all of a sudden, as if she didn't understand the situation. She looked at the scene in front of her sluggishly, pointed to the scrawny man and asked with some uncertainty, "Charles, is that person?" Before Hermione could finish the question, Seal smiled and nodded. For Seal, who had unforgettable memories of that month, whether it was Sirius, Harry, or Weasley who looked at his son worriedly couple, Charles can understand their feelings. After watching for a while, Seal shook his head, took Hermione's hand again and led her around a few people. Hermione seemed a little reluctant, because she hadn't even said hello to Harry. Ron. Leaving like this made Hermione wonder if she would be rude. Seal obviously knew what Hermione was thinking. After pulling Hermione away from these two warm families, Seal said to Hermione as he walked, "Believe me, what they need now is definitely not us. Leave time to these two families, I know how it feels." Quote. After hearing Seal's words, Hermione was stunned for a moment, and she seemed to want to understand the key. "Well, you're right, and I miss my parents and Mr. and Mrs. William too." Seeing Hermione, who became cheerful in an instant, the smile on the corner of Seal's mouth became more intense, but after walking for a while, Seal seemed to remember something, and the smile on the corner of his mouth froze on his face. Random Seal grabbed the cheerful Hermione and said to Hermione with a serious face, "Hermione, there is one thing we need to discuss in advance." Hermione looked at Seal's serious look, and suddenly became nervous for no reason, as if she felt that Seal was going to say something important. Seeing that Hermione was also serious, Shire was relieved, and then said to Hermione, "Don't tell your parents, uncles and aunts what happened this year, whether it's mine, or Harry and Ron's." After listening to Seal's words, Hermione was still a little puzzled. She didn't know why Seal didn't allow herself to tell these things. It was clear that all the credit was due to Seal, and Seal also had a very magnificent adventure. Seeing Hermione's somewhat puzzled expression, Seal slowly and quietly told Hermione the night talk of last summer vacation, and Hermione understood what Seal was thinking at once. For some unknown reason, Hermione looked at Seal and felt as if a child had grown up. She smiled and rubbed Seal's smooth black hair with her hands, and then said to Seal with a smile, "Don't worry, the child has grown up. We haven't encountered anything this semester. Just go to school honestly, and go to class honestly, don't we?" Hearing Hermione's answer, Seal burst out laughing, and angrily knocked off the hand that was still destroying his hairstyle on his head, and then looked at Hermione with his teeth dancing. "Okay, you little hairy dumpling dares to ravage my great demon King Seal, look at the trick." As he spoke, he rubbed his sinful hand on Hermione's head, and Hermione also smiled and made a "I'm so scared" expression, and then ran away with a smile. Seal followed Hermione with a suitcase and was playing the role of the big devil who wanted to capture the princess. All the way, the two laughed happily. What Shire and Hermione didn't know was that the parents of the two families were standing at the exit of the train station at this time, with their aunts smiling as they watched the two laughing and joking, and they didn't seem to be in any hurry. "Look. Katakana middle dot katakana middle dot katakana middle dot." In the end, Seal and Hermione still had a good meal at the burger shop at the station, a calorie bomb from the Muggle world. I didn't dare to say anything else, since Seal was so moved that he wanted to cry when he drank the Coke. What a delicacy in this world. This was probably the only sentence that Seal had in his head at that time, and at the same time, Seal also silently made up his mind that he would take advantage of this summer vacation to make more money, and he must start school by himself. Just fill the box with carbonated drinks. By the way, it's funny to say that Shire and Hermione actually met Harry and Harry's uncle's family and Sirius at the burger shop at the station. It's just that few people didn't seem to find Seal and the Hermione family. Seal's father was stopped by Seal when he wanted to say hello to the Harry family. If nothing else, now might not be the best time for a few people to show up. Seal believes that it is the right way to get away quickly, so as not to wait for Harry to be embarrassed. What's more, if Sirius knew about Harry's living conditions, he would have thought that Sirius was a gentleman enough without pulling out his wand and staring at Uncle Harry's head. Under the urging of Shire and Hermione, the two families finally sneaked around the few people who seemed to be about to quarrel, and sneaked out. It wasn't until the two families sat on the Muggle MPV that Seal dreamed of again, and Seal felt the softness under his butt and the comfort of the backrest, and he sighed contentedly. Seeing Seal looking like a salted fish, Hermione looked at Seal with some disgust. Seeing Hermione's eyes, Shire suddenly became excited, and retorted with his neck, "Isn't this thing more comfortable than that broom?" Hermione's eyes were still somewhat disgusting, but she was speechless. She rolled her eyes and ignored Seal, who was incarnated as a salted fish. Seal didn't care. Days and nights, and then stay up all night to play games with him all night. It's just that Seal thought about it, but suddenly remembered something, and couldn't hold back his exclamation for a while. "Damn it, I almost forgot, that bastard Sirius still owes me a huge sum of money, Jin Jalong. This bastard hasn't paid me back after so long. I borrowed it from the teacher." As soon as Sha'ur's voice fell, all of a sudden, the eyes of the three ladies in the car looked at Sha'ur, and the eyes became dangerous at the same time. Chapter 256_Dumbledore's Surprise Visit. All in all, the summer of Ciel's life began like this with the interrogation of three ladies. No, strictly speaking, it was an interrogation of two ladies and a lady watching a play. Ciel's mother's focus is on the Jin Galleon in Ciel. As a mother, after knowing that the gold galleon is the currency of the magic world, and hearing what Ciel said, the first reaction of the policeman's mother is that this is bad luck. Is it possible that the child is engaging in finance at school? Be aware that high interest rates are illegal no matter what country you are in. Hermione's eyes were even more dangerous. Even though she knew that Sirius was wronged, she dared to talk to the fugitive about money when Sirius was not wronged. You is talking to the bank robbers about money. Fortunately, Hermione still remembered Ciel's request at this time. Not only did she not attack immediately, but she also helped Ciel to fool Ciel's mother with a business lie because he didn't want to worry his parents. After all, as a child who had his own ideas about everything since he was a child, if Ciel's mother said anything about investing in business, Ciel's mother didn't care at all, but if she wanted to die in finance, she had to talk about it. Although it was fooled, Ciel's mother was still very uneasy and asked Ciel to temporarily put the Jin Galleon he got into the hands of his intended daughter-in-law, Hermione. Ciel originally wanted to resist, but looking at his mother's increasingly dangerous eyes, Ciel agreed to this statement based on the idea that as long as his mother was happy at home, the whole family would be happy. As for Hermione, at this time, she had no more ideas, and she even completely forgot her heart to go to Ciel to clarify what was going on afterward. At this time, Hermione felt as if she was about to awaken the fire element. Her face was so hot that she seemed to be able to fry a steak or something. Her mind was full of Mrs. Williams' predetermined daughter-in-law. As for Hermione's mother, she kept looking at the two children with gossip and sleepy eyes, and she was about to hold a bucket of popcorn and Coke in her arms. As for the actions of Mama Shire, as a future mother-in-law, Mrs. Granger agreed with both hands and feet. After all, whether it is her own family or the Shire family, women are responsible for the accounts. After all, a man is fine. If Ciel and two grown-up fathers and three men get together, I really can't say what will happen. You can't see what will happen if Ciel and Mr. William alone can send the backyard to the sky. Really, it is hard to imagine what will happen to the three of them together. Throwing out the fact that Ciel lost a lot of gold galleons, in fact, Ciel felt that his summer vacation started very well. In particular, Ciel was well versed in the truth of being frank and lenient and resisting strictness, and after taking the initiative to explain many things about him to Hermione and even his two mothers, Ciel admitted that he was still very comfortable. This kind of experience of not doing homework, eating on time, dragging Hermione around, feeling the wonderful experience that technology brings to people really makes Ciel linger. Even the most surprising thing for Shire was that he bought tea from rabbits and a full set of kung fu tea utensils in London's Chinatown, which made Shire feel better than ever. Only a week after the holiday started, Ciel had already led a wonderful life of taking Hermione to read books and drink tea on the balcony on the second floor, while enjoying the cool breeze and watching the scenery. Even later, Hermione fell in love with this magical leaf from rabbits. It was the first time in Hermione's limited life that she had met other magical things that were slightly bitter, not to mention Shire. The set of smooth operations is simply full of ritual, and I quite like this kind of elegant taste. Seriously, if it weren't for the second week, when Shire and Hermione were drinking tea on the balcony on the second floor, watching the scenery and sunbathing, they saw a long-bearded old man wearing a Versace suit all his life slowly. He walked towards his house, and Seal even felt that it was not impossible for him to spend his vacation in such a leisurely manner. As for Dumbledore's visit, Seal said that although it was abrupt, it was unexpected. As for Dumbledore's words about a beautiful and leisurely vacation, Seal believed the truth for 5 days. On the 6th day, Seal felt that if he could really live a leisurely life by himself in such a turbulent period, he would really see a ghost. Seal was not surprised by Dumbledore's arrival. On the contrary, Hermione was surprised and inspired. After seeing Dumbledore from a distance, before Seal could react, he quickly rushed into the room after a scream. Clothes, and went downstairs to open the door for Dumbledore. On the contrary, it was Seal. After Dumbledore walked in, he calmly got up and took his tea table. He didn't even bother to change his clothes, so he went downstairs leisurely. It wasn't until Dumbledore and Hermione sat on the sofa after greeting and sitting on the sofa that Seal slowly came to the two of them with the tea table, put the tea table on the coffee table and gave Dumbledore a cup of tea. Then he sat lazily on the sofa opposite Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Seal, who seemed to have turned into a sun-dried salted fish, with some amusement, and then said in a leisurely manner, "It seems that your holiday life is very pleasant." Charles rolled his eyes helplessly at Dumbledore's ridicule, and then replied, "If a vacation can't be used to enjoy it, then it's not called a vacation, okay. Let's get down to business. Teacher, what wind brought you here?" Seeing Seal's languid and uncontrollable salted fish appearance, Dumbledore unexpectedly did not refute, but continued with a smile. "It's not a big deal, but there's something I want to bring you to attend. Oh, of course, it would be my honor if Granger could come too." After he finished speaking, he didn't forget to wink at Hermione mischievously, but Hermione didn't say anything, just looked at Seal and Dumbledore with a blushing face, then lowered his head and didn't know what he was thinking. On the other hand, Charles, after hearing Dumbledore's words, readjusted his sitting position, and suddenly got rid of his original appearance of salted fish, and looked at his teacher with a mocking look. "Teacher, what about a leisurely vacation?" Hearing Seal's ridicule, Dumbledore was not angry, very elegantly picked up the teacup and took a sip before slowly answering Seal, "Can't the plan keep up with the changes? Tea from the East." "Yes, I haven't had it for decades, and although it's a bit elegant, it's still memorable." Dumbledore's appearance caused a black line on Seal's forehead. After biting his back molars, Seal continued, "Let's get down to business. I still have a lot of tea. I'll bring you some when I'm wrinkled. Drink less. Some sugar. Be careful with diabetes, teacher." After hearing Seal's ridicule, Dumbledore put away the joke on his face and became serious. "You should know about next year, about the Triwizard Hegemony. I want to take you to the other two school." Chapter 257 Banquet of the Triwizard Hegemony. Hermione, who was still shy, heard about the Triwizard Hegemony, and even couldn't hold back her curiosity and asked what the Triwizard Hegemony was. Dumbledore patiently explained it to Hermione completely, but after hearing Dumbledore's words, Seal held his chin and thought about it for a long time. After a long time, Dumbledore remembered something and said, "Little Hermione, go home and pack up. We'll be leaving in a minute, don't forget to tell your parents." Hermione didn't see that Dumbledore was distracting her at all. Her mind was full of the Triwizard Hegemony and the other two magic schools. She just clicked and ran to her house quickly. After seeing Hermione leave, the smile on Dumbledore's face gradually disappeared, and he became a little serious. Seal also did it very seriously, frowning tightly, looking at his teacher. What the hell happened to the teacher to keep Hermione away? Hearing Seal's question, Dumbledore said with a serious face, "Last night's news, Peter Pettigrew has escaped from Azkaban, whereabouts are unknown, the Ministry of Magic immediately blocked the news, only a few people knowing this. Peter Pettigrew is currently being secretly hunted down. Hearing Dumbledore's words, CL's brows furrowed even deeper, and he looked at Dumbledore and said with some seriousness, "It's normal, these should all be in my plan, and the Ministry of Magic should also be running away from Peter Pettigrew. Only later did I learn about the management of Animagus, not to mention the fact that I let him exercise for so long. Shouldn't this be the main problem?" After hearing CL's words, Dumbledore nodded, and then continued, "Yes, Peter Pettigrew's escape was still within my expectations, but the series of events that occurred after he escaped were quite surprising." Quote. After speaking, Dumbledore paused, as if to sort out his thoughts, and then continued, "This Triwizard Tournament is actually very deep, and the original 3 principals' intentions were not great. Of last semester, Barty Crouch has been lobbying among the 3 schools, and finally got all 3 schools to agree to it. I finally got the message and agreed, although I already know about this. This is not the most important thing. The strange thing is that Durmstrang's principal Karkaroff, at first he firmly disagreed with this matter, but with the number of times Barty Crouch went to Durmstrang more and more, Karkaroff's attitude has undergone a 180-degree change, and he even started to contact me and Beauxbatons. Of course, there are still traces to follow, but after Peter Pettigrew escaped, Karkaroff didn't know why and even started to behave abnormally. As if he had received some news, he who was still very enthusiastic about the Triwizard hegemony suddenly began to oppose it again, and even threatened to cancel the Triwizard hegemony, but he was very supportive not long after that." Dumbledore was speaking slowly, and the more Charles listened, the tighter his brows became. When Dumbledore finished speaking, Charlie responded and frowned at Dumbledore. "Teacher, do you mean to suspect that Karkaroff is under the Imperius curse?" Dumbledore nodded and shook his head, then continued, "I don't know, Shire. Karkaroff was originally a member of the Death Eaters, but he escaped under the pretext of the Imperius curse. Punish. Later, although he became Durmstrang's principal, he was still a Philistine to the extreme, and now I can't say anything about his abnormality." Hearing Dumbledore's words, Seal reacted at once, with a smile on his face, and then said to Dumbledore, "I understand, teacher, you want to use my grievance between Voldemort to test the card. Karloff. See if he is friend or foe." After hearing Seal's words, a smile appeared on Dumbledore's face, and he said to Seal with a smile, "It's not all, it's just one aspect. The main trend is that in this banquet where the 3 schools meet, each principal will bring their most satisfied students. Karkaroff leads a little guy named Crumb, Maxim leads a little girl named Farong. I decided to bring you." Seal looked shocked when he heard Dumbledore's words. It wasn't some kind of exchange banquet with this motherfucker, nor was it some plan to test Karkaroff, just his mother's meeting to show off students. But Seal suddenly thought of something, and the original shocked expression instantly changed to the uncomfortable feeling of eating a dead fly. "Can I refuse?" "Seriously, teacher, I'm afraid I see that guy named Cromwell. I can't help but beat him up." Hearing Seal's words, Dumbledore was obviously stunned, and looked at Seal with some doubts. "You know that little guy named Crumb?" "Oh, yes, he seems to be a seeker for the Bulgarian national team. Do you have a holiday?" Seal still maintained the expression of eating dead flies. "No, I don't know him, and there's nothing to celebrate. It's just that he's not pleasing to the eye at all." While talking, Seal looked at the door where Hermione left just now, thinking about what kind of reason will be found to keep Hermione away from that hapless Crumb. Looking at Seal's small movements, the old and sophisticated Dumbledore seemed to understand Seal's careful thoughts at once, smiled and brought himself another cup of tea, and leaned leisurely on the soft back of the sofa. The old god looking at Charles, he continued. "Well, it seems that you don't like such occasions very much, so I had to go alone with Hermione." Hearing Dumbledore's words, Seal jumped 3 feet high and bounced off the sofa like a spring. "Don't. I'll go. I won't be ashamed of you. I'll go upstairs and pack up now." After finishing speaking, regardless of Dumbledore's reaction, he ran upstairs to his room while muttering. Here, while Seal was packing his clothes upstairs, he began to constantly recall the summer vacation he spent with Grindelwald. To be honest, Seal began to figure it out. If that damn crumb dared to get close to Hermione within 5 meters, Seal wouldn't mind replicating the gas stove of Durmstrang Ace graduate Grindelwald. What the fuck is the kind of electric ignition? On the contrary, Dumbledore was sitting downstairs, holding a teacup in his hand, drinking one sip after another, frowning tightly. As for the simple reason, this banquet was not only about 3 schools, but also countless other schools. Irrelevant people wait. Chapter 258 published by Spartan. After a while, Seal appeared in the living room again carrying his small suitcase, looked at his teacher dangerously, and said with his back molars almost gritted. "Teacher, don't worry, I will never embarrass you." Seeing Seal gnashing his teeth, Dumbledore suddenly felt that his mood suddenly improved for no reason. It seemed that he suddenly found the same happiness that he completed a prank when he was still in school. That is to say, because of the earrings on his ears. Dumbledore couldn't marry Dumbledore because of the earrings on his ears. Otherwise, if he knew that Charles was not thinking about the electric gas stove all the time, he would definitely be frightened. Break out in a cold sweat. You must know that this matter of Grindelwald's successor is the secret of Dumbledore and Seal for a lifetime, and even the fact that Grindelwald is currently wandering outside is only known by the 2 of them. If Seal really comes to a wave of gas stoves, let's not say whether there is any doubt about the relationship between Seal and Grindelwald, just that simple power can do the things of the 3rd generation of the Dark Lord of Seal. Some things are often not what you want to accomplish, but the people around you are constantly pushing you to complete them. The 2 teased each other for only a short time, and Hermione opened the door of Shire's house with a small suitcase. After all, the 2 visited each other all the year round, and it was normal to have a key or something. As for clothes, there were quite a few in Seal's small suitcase anyway, and Hermione wasn't worried about not having any clothes to wear. On the contrary, Seal looked a little surprised at Hermione's small box. "Are you going to take this out?" Hearing Seal's question, Hermione was a little overwhelmed for a while. In her opinion, these clothes are completely enough. After all, there are quite a few in Seal's small suitcase. The other hand, Dumbledore shook his head, and then continued, "It doesn't matter, the banquet was held at Beauxbatons in France for some reason. I think I can give you a set of dresses, which will be used when school starts anyway. Isn't it?" Hermione was even more puzzled after hearing Dumbledore's words. What banquet? What dress? Hermione felt like she was missing something important. However, when Charles heard about France, he inadvertently remembered that he had slapped his teacher in Paris, and it seemed that he could make another sting, plus the taste of French cuisine. For a moment, Seal felt that there were tears of excitement on the corners of his mouth. Fortunately, Shire's YY didn't last long before being interrupted by Hermione. After explaining a wave of crude oil to Hermione, Hermione seemed to want to go home and change clothes. No evening gowns or anything. But thinking about how Charles on the Champs-Élysées would pass up such a good opportunity to harass his own teacher and come and go without being indecent, he hurriedly stopped Hermione and said that his teacher was the richest of the 3. The presence of will sponsor us 2 sets of dresses. "Don't panic." Randomly asked again in a firm tone. Dumbledore didn't expect Seal's revenge to come so quickly, so he could only shake his head with a wry smile and nodded in response. In this way, Seal didn't forget to reiterate that it was 2 sets. Angrily Dumbledore nodded again, gritted his teeth. Seal nodded with satisfaction, and started to invite Dumbledore to eat here at noon with a smile on his face, and then set off together in the afternoon after eating. It also happened that Seal and Hermione's parents would have a rest in the afternoon, and the better the noon, they would have a meal together at Shire's house. Shire was very familiar with the things that go along with the water. Dumbledore looked at Seal's Philistine appearance and finally nodded helplessly and agreed, and for a moment Dumbledore even began to worry about whether Seal would develop in Karkaroff's direction in the future. Fortunately, Dumbledore's worries did not last long, and Shire's mother and Mrs. Granger walked into the house with the vegetables they bought. The 2 ladies showed great welcome to Dumbledore's arrival. After learning that Dumbledore was going to take Hermione and Shire away for a short time to attend a magical banquet, the two ladies agreed to Dumbledore without hesitation. The most exaggerated is Mrs. Granger. At this time, she has completely given up the busy work in the kitchen, and alone pulls Hermione aside and starts to continuously teach some makeup skills. The two even glanced at Shire from time to time, and then continued to discuss in a low voice. When the two fathers returned, Mrs. William also participated in the discussion with Hermione. The kitchen had been completely handed over to the two men, and the two mothers kept instilling something in Hermione. Seal sat on the sofa and chatted with Dumbledore and T, occasionally. Look at the three women hiding aside. What Seal didn't understand was that he didn't know what the two mothers had instilled in Hermione. Hermione, who was still very interested, started to blush slowly, and even buried her head in her chest in the end. The red ones are almost turning into steam princesses. On the contrary, Dumbledore looked at the development of all this with some amusing, shaking his head from time to time and sighing in his heart that youth is good. In such a strange atmosphere, the seven finally finished a sumptuous lunch, and even Dumbledore had to admit that the craftsmanship of the two men was quite good. So much so that Dumbledore chatted with the two parents about the performance of Shire and Hermione in school for a while after the meal, and he didn't say anything bad anyway, and the atmosphere could be called a happy one. As the afternoon approached, Dumbledore stood up, ended this pleasant conversation, and left for Beauxbatons with the two children. Under the relieved gazes of the four parents, Hermione blushed and stuffed her luggage into Ciel's suitcase, and Seal followed behind Dumbledore with the suitcase in one hand and Hermione in the other. Farewell to parents. It wasn't until he couldn't see his little house that Seal seemed to remember something, looking at his teacher who was walking in front. Teacher, how on earth did we get to France? Don't be some unlucky thing like a door key. The more Seal said, the tighter his brows became. To be honest, Seal was really afraid of that thing, and he never had a good experience. After hearing Ciel's words, Dumbledore just smiled slightly in front, and then continued, Don't worry, this time is a special channel of the Ministry of Magic, which is an official visit. After hearing Dumbledore's words, Seal turned cloudy and sunny, and took Hermione's hand and walked happily. What Charles didn't know was that after Dumbledore finished saying this, he patted a folded bag in his suit pocket and walked with satisfaction. Official visit from the Ministry of Magic. That transnational thing, what else can you have but a door key for high speed? Do you really think that everyone has the same natural elements as you? A successful smile. Chapter 259 Third Visit to Charles in France. After experiencing a fierce struggle, at this time, Charles was in a dark alley, holding a French-made trash can and constantly spitting rainbows. Hermione looked at the gradually weak Seal with a funny expression, but Dumbledore looked at Seal happily with a prank on his face with his hands on his face. Recalling how he was struggling with all his life in the Shire of the British Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore felt very happy at this time. Even at the beginning, the little depression when he was caught by the four suits of Shah-Urkin has disappeared at this time. Although Dumbledore was relieved, our classmate Shire, who almost spit out our internal organs, did not forget this, and decided to change the idea of saving some money for old Deng and just buying some ordinary dresses. At the beginning of the summer vacation this year, Shire bought 2 new Nokias for convenience. Looking at this black and white screen gadget that could smash walnuts, Shire said that he missed it very much. Then he backhanded it and mailed it to Grindelwald together with the manual. After a short period of research, Grindelwald also said that this thing is much more convenient than an owl or something. Charles even learned about Dumbledore's family background while he was chatting with Grindelwald when he was fresh. Who would have thought that this old bee would secretly invest in a lot of candy factories in the Muggle world, and even Ferrero and Dove, who were famous in their previous lives, had shares in Laudang. It is precisely this that makes Shah-Ur have no pressure on the matter of pitting Laudang's dress. This is a big dog. This is his own teacher. For Laudang's deceitful sake, if he doesn't act ruthlessly, I'm really sorry for my stomach. Fortunately, Shah-Ur's discomfort didn't last long. but after a while, with a snap, a man and a woman appeared behind the three of them. Both of them were wearing Muggle clothes, but looking at the three of them could make Seal, who was not so conscious at this time, to be sure that the two were definitely not Muggles. After all, the way that girl looked at Dumbledore was no longer purely respectful. She even had a trace of fanaticism from her previous life when she looked at Dumbledore's idols, and even looked at Shire and Hermione. Of jealousy. It was also the first time that Shire discovered that his teacher actually had such a big fan appeal in the magical world. This discovery also made Shire feel amazing. After all, he and Lao Deng got along so much that he had even forgotten a little. After all, Lao Deng is still the strongest white magician in the world. Of course, this woman's subsequent operations also confirmed Ciel's conjecture very well. This set of praise and signature operations is very skilled. Dumbledore seems to be very accustomed to such operations. He smiled on the notebook handed over by the woman. Write a message of congratulations. After that, the process was much simpler. The two took Ciel and the three to a splendid-looking hotel, and then the two left in a hurry. If there is no accident in this hotel, there should be a few people in the past few days. Foothold. However, the hotel or something was not enough to surprise Shire. What surprised Shire most was that this hotel was actually a Muggle hotel. It was hard for Ciel to imagine that a large group of wizards would live in a hotel run by Muggles. Fortunately, Ciel's surprise didn't last long before he knew what was going on. It turned out to be to take care of the guests of the Ministry of Magic and the school in various countries. The French Ministry of Magic can be said to be bleeding heavily this time. It completely took over an entire Muggle hotel and replaced the waiters with house elves. As for the original staff of the hotel, it is very simple. They ushered in nearly 2 weeks of paid vacation. Everyone was happy, except the official in charge of finances at the French Ministry of Magic. Of course, the hemorrhage of the French Ministry of Magic is not without reason. At present, there is no conclusion on which school the Triwizard Tournament will be held. It is not ruled out that the hemorrhage in France is to ask his own Beauxbatons to undertake the Triwizard competition. It's just that Charles knew that the French Ministry of Magic's phone bill would definitely be in vain. Let's not mention the plot and other things, just say that the Karkaroff is not very normal, and Charles feels that French magic the Ministry's little idea is definitely to dance for the blind, which is a waste of emotion. Of course, Ciel will not tell anyone about this. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with Ciel in the strict sense. At this time, Ciel is full of revenge for himself, who always likes to satisfy his own bad tastes in himself. The teacher is. Of course, in the end, Ciel was victorious, and took Old Deng and Hermione to buy 2 sets of dresses for herself and Hermione in the Champs-Élysées. By the way, Ciel also invited Hermione to be his dance partner at the dance after school, and Hermione readily agreed. With Hermione's consent, Ciel suddenly had the motivation to go shopping for some unknown reason. In the end, at the strong suggestion of Ciel, Hermione chose a gorgeous backless evening dress for the prom next term. For a reason, when Hermione came out of the fitting room, Ciel felt his eyes almost fell on Hermione. Anyway, it was Old Deng who spent the money, and Ciel almost fooled Hermione into buying this dress. As for this banquet in France, when Shire thought of Crumb, he almost didn't drag Hermione to buy a formal dress for ladies. Fortunately, Hermione and Lao Deng were still sensible, and finally chose a more conservative dress. Even Ciel felt that he was at a loss. In the end, it was when Hermione promised that the backless dress belonged only to Ciel, and Ciel smiled. Finally, after Dumbledore settled the bill very painfully, the three slowly returned to the hotel and decided to have dinner at the hotel. During the dinner, Old Deng said that he would also attend some meetings of the Ministry of Magic and the principals in the past 2 days. The dinner would be held 2 days later, and during these 2 days, Shire and Hermione could go shopping on their own. And Dumbledore, who was worried, had already greeted Fawkes in advance. If he really encountered any danger, as long as Ciel called Fawkes's name, Fawkes would definitely appear to help Ciel at the first time. At the same time, Old Deng could also Seal is in danger through his contract with Fox. Of course, Seal didn't care about it. If there was a fight, Seal really didn't mind letting the other party have a taste of what it was like to fight Pikachu. After all, Seal hadn't really done it after finishing the natural elements. But on the surface, Seal still agreed to Dumbledore's words very seriously. Seeing Seal nodding honestly, Dumbledore was also very happy, and said that there should be a fireworks party held by Muggles tomorrow night. Seal could take Hermione to see it. Not to mention, when Seal heard the news, he glanced at Hermione, who was eating like a cat, and nodded forcefully. Chapter 260-ambiguity under the fireworks. Early the next morning, Dumbledore slid a letter under Seal's door and left the hotel alone. Seal slept until noon before being woken up by Hermione's knock on the door. Little Neezy burst out with great enthusiasm for the fireworks display in the Muggle world. She even got up early and waited for Seal, but Seal stayed in bed all the time. In the end, Hermione couldn't wait any longer. He ran to Seal's house and started knocking on the door, which woke Seal. After the two of them had a simple lunch at the hotel, Hermione pulled and started walking towards the fireworks display under the guidance of the map. The two successfully arrived at the venue. One thing to say, this venue is not very far from the Eiffel Tower, but it is the best place to watch the fireworks. At this time, the road was already crowded with people. On both sides of the road, there are invisible vendors who are constantly selling some French snacks, and there are even some small vendors selling souvenirs. Everything seems to be very lively, and even occasionally mixed with some strangely dressed guys. If Seal didn't feel it carefully, these guys in strange clothes have no magic power in their bodies, and Seal has begun to suspect that these guys are not some wizard who doesn't know what Muggles are. No matter what Seal thought, Hermione was extremely excited, pulling Seal and starting to linger in the various stalls. Occasionally even pull Shire to buy some cheap but fun-looking Muggle gadgets. Even Seal, who was still a little lazy at first, gradually became happy. The girl's surprised voice and the expression of surprise after eating delicious food made Seal gradually indulge in the festive atmosphere created by this fireworks display. The cheers and laughter of the surrounding crowd gradually intensified this cheerful atmosphere, and even later, Charles discovered that the entire road was filled with couples of men and women. In such a joyful atmosphere, the smiles on the faces of Seal and Hermione gradually became more and more, and even when the sun completely disappeared from people's field of vision, the bright lights had an ambiguous light. When the atmosphere gradually lit up the whole street, Seal woke up with a start. Fortunately, Hermione was still staying by Seal's side at this time, holding an unknown dessert in her hand and eating it in small bites. The cream on the dessert was hanging on her lips without knowing it, and her bright big eyes were still there. It is with a curious and excited light looking at the surrounding liveliness. Maybe it was because of the lights. When the warm yellow and ambiguous lights shone on Hermione, who had been running all afternoon, her face was flushed with redness, and Seal's heartbeat seemed to skip a beat. Seal swore that he had never noticed that Hermione was so beautiful at this time. Even under the light of the light, Seal felt that the girl's agile appearance at this time was like an elf walking out of a fairy tale. Before Seal could react, a radio sounded. It was a French broadcast. Seal didn't understand what the radio was saying, but with the broadcast, the originally happy crowd seemed to feel something, and began to keep going. Gathered towards Seal and Hermione. In a short time, a large crowd gathered around Seal and Hermione, and the crowd began to wrap around Seal and Hermione and began to move slowly. Under such circumstances, Seal could also hug Hermione quietly so as to ensure that the two would not be scattered by the crowd, and they were mixed in with the crowd. Seal didn't even notice that Hermione was in front of him at this time. His face was already red and hot. The two walked with the crowd for a short time, and there was a scream in the sky, followed by a loud explosion, and a huge fireworks exploded on the head of the crowd. With the fireworks blooming not far from the crowd, everyone made a cheerful cry, and the atmosphere seemed to have reached its peak for a while. It's just that such cheers didn't seem to infect Hermione and Seal, for the simple reason that the height of the two of them seemed out of place in the crowd who were thanking and cheering. One is himself, whether it's Shire or Hermione, they're a little dejected. Even Hermione felt a little wronged. Looking up at the small piece of sky above her head, Hermione whispered to Seal a little aggrieved. "I'm sorry, Seal, it's my fault that I had such a good time. I forgot to avoid the crowd in advance and find a place to watch the fireworks." Hearing Hermione's aggrieved voice in his arms, Seal looked down at the girl's hairy head with difficulty. Because of the crowd, Seal couldn't see Hermione's expression. After Seal thought about it for a while, a bold idea appeared in Seal's mind. He touched Hermione's head with a smile, lowered his head and whispered in Hermione's ear, "Hold me tight, I'll take you to a place. The place to watch fireworks. By the way, don't tell anyone about it." After speaking, no matter how Hermione reacted, he hugged Hermione tightly, and then, under the cover of fireworks, there was an undetectable crackling sound on his body, accompanied by a random explosion of fireworks. People suddenly disappeared into the crowd. When Hermione reacted, the two had already appeared on the roof of a building. The resident of the building seemed to be a guy with a lot of interest in life. The entire roof was transformed into a small garden. In the garden on the roof, you can see the fireworks and the beautiful Eiffel Tower under the fireworks. Before Hermione was surprised, Seal had already found an excellent viewing spot. Seal was sitting on the edge of the building, with his legs hanging in the air and beckoning to Hermione. When Hermione walked over and sat down, she realized how amazing the place that Seal was looking for, and the cheering crowd could still be seen under his feet, the Eiffel Tower not far away, and the fireworks complemented each other, and a bright moon shone in the sky. The whole land, plus the night scene of Paris, Hermione was mesmerized for a while. Seeing Hermione immersed in the beautiful scenery, Seal's mouth slowly put on a smile, and he was playing wildly with Hermione in the afternoon, secretly observing the surrounding terrain. At this time, Hermione was already intoxicated by such a beautiful scenery, and the colorful light of fireworks shone on Hermione's face, making Hermione's performance more beautiful. Seal, who wanted to take credit at first, was stunned for a while when he saw such a scene. After a long time, Seal just made up his mind and took the girl's hand carefully. Hermione didn't resist, as if she was still immersed in the beauty, but her face flushed slightly. It also makes Hermione look even more beautiful and heartwarming. For a long time, the teenager looked at the girl, and the girl looked at the beautiful scenery, but the figure of the teenager was all in her heart. A wormwood bloomed quietly behind the two of them.